Factory 1. The Silent Arrival. The Vespera corridor, a sprawling testament to human ambition and industrial might, hummed with a ceaseless, rhythmic energy. It was November the 14th, 2023, and the air, sharp with the promise of winter, carried the faint, metallic tang of the sprawling factories in Iron Basin, mingling with the distant, almost musical thrum of high-speed maglev trains crisscrossing the landscape. Above it all, an invisible ballet of air traffic danced with precision, orchestrated by the unseen hands of the Vespera Central Air Traffic Control. This was not a sky for the whimsical or the uninitiated. It was a meticulously mapped domain, a three-dimensional grid of flight paths, restricted zones, and regulated altitudes, all designed to channel the ceaseless flow of commerce and transport through the Republic of Oak Haven's most vital economic artery. For decades, the corridor had been a marvel of efficiency, a model of controlled chaos. Commercial cargo drones, sleek and silent, traced predetermined routes, ferrying goods between the towering automated warehouses of Silver Reach and the bustling trade hubs of the Spires. Passenger shuttles, their windows glowing with the soft light of internal displays, ferried executives and workers with clockwork regularity. Even the occasional military patrol, a dark, angular silhouette against the perpetual twilight of the industrial sky, adhered to its assigned corridors, a silent guardian in a realm of strict adherence to protocol. Deviations were not merely frowned upon, they were anomalies, red flags in a system designed for absolute predictability. Every craft, from the smallest private courier to the largest atmospheric freighter, broadcast its identity, its trajectory, its purpose, a constant stream of data fed into the hungry maw of Vespera Central's mainframes. The sky above the corridor was a symphony of order, and any discordant note was immediately identified, analyzed, and, if necessary, neutralized to night comma. However, the symphony was about to encounter a silence it had never known. The chill wind, whipping through the canyons of glass and steel, carried no hint of the impending disruption. The ground crews in Iron Basin, bundled against the cold, oversaw the automated loading of containers, their breath pluming in the frigid air. In the residential towers of the Spires, families gathered for evening meals, their lives unfolding beneath a sky they implicitly trusted to be safe, predictable, and utterly mundane. The intricate web of sensors, radars, and transponders that guarded the Vespera corridor's airspace was a marvel of engineering, a digital sentinel that had never failed. Yet the unknown was about to slip through its net, not with a bang, but with an almost imperceptible shimmer, a whisper in the vast, cold expanse above Elias Thorne, his face illuminated by the cool glow of multiple holographic displays, was a man carved from the very essence of Vespera Central. His eyes, a weary but sharp blue, scanned the intricate dance of digital icons representing every airborne vessel within his sector. For 20 years, he had been a silent conductor of this aerial orchestra, his voice a calm, authoritative presence in the ears of pilots and drone operators. The rhythmic beeps and soft hum of the control room were as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Tonight, like countless nights before, promised a routine flow of traffic, a predictable ebb and flow of departures and arrivals. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and ozone, a comforting aroma that spoke of vigilance and control. He adjusted his headset, the slight pressure a familiar comfort. Vespera 7 Alpha 9, you are cleared for descent to 5,000 meters. Maintain vector 045, he intoned, his voice a smooth baritone. A crisp acknowledgement came back, and he watched the corresponding icon on his main display smoothly adjust its trajectory. Elias prided himself on his unwavering focus, his ability to sift through a torrent of data and instantly identify any deviation, however minor. He had seen it all: rogue weather patterns, minor equipment malfunctions, even the occasional pilot error. Each time his training and instinct had guided him, maintaining the delicate balance of the corridor's airspace. But tonight a subtle unease began to prick at the edges of his composure. It wasn't anything he could pinpoint on his screens, no flashing red alerts or urgent comms. It was a feeling, a faint dissonance in the otherwise perfect symphony of data. He ran a diagnostic sweep of his sector, the algorithms whirring silently in the background, confirming all systems nominal. Yet the feeling persisted, a ghost in the machine of his own intuition. He glanced at the clock, 21:37. The night was still young, and the busiest period was yet to come. He took a slow sip of his lukewarm coffee, the bitterness a welcome jolt against the growing, inexplicable sense of foreboding. The Vespera corridor, for all its technological prowess, was about to face something that defied its meticulously crafted logic, something that would challenge the very foundation of Elias Thorne's ordered world. Miles away, in the labyrinthine alleys of Silver Reach, Kaylin Vance was wrestling with a deadline and a particularly stubborn paragraph. Her small apartment, perched precariously on the 5th floor of a crumbling pre-corridor building, offered a less than glamorous view of the industrial sprawl. But it was cheap, and the faint hum of the city was a constant, if sometimes irritating, companion. Kaylin, a freelance investigative journalist with a penchant for uncovering the inconvenient truths beneath the Republic's polished facade, thrived in this environment of overlooked details. Her current piece, a scathing expose on the environmental impact of the new hydro-processing plants in Iron Basin, was proving difficult to condense without losing its bite. She pushed a stray lock of auburn hair from her eyes, her fingers stained with ink from her worn notebook. Unlike the pristine digital world of Vespera Central, Kaylin preferred the tactile reality of paper and pen, believing it captured nuances that screens often missed. Her laptop, a battered but reliable model, glowed with the half-finished article. She sighed, stretching her stiff shoulders. A break was in order. She walked to the small grimy window, pushing aside the threadbare curtains. The night sky, usually a dull orange haze from the city's perpetual glow, seemed unusually clear tonight, a vast canvas dotted with the familiar, blinking lights of aircraft. She watched them for a moment, a silent, almost meditative ritual she often performed to clear her head. Then she saw them. Not the familiar rhythmic blinking of navigation lights, nor the steady, purposeful glide of a cargo drone. These were different. A cluster of faint, steady white lights, moving with an unnerving, almost fluid grace. They were too numerous to be a single aircraft, too organized to be random debris, and too silent to be anything she recognized. They held their formation with an eerie precision, drifting slowly, almost imperceptibly, over the towering spires of the city's financial district. Kaylin's journalistic instincts, honed by years of sniffing out anomalies, immediately flared. This wasn't normal. This wasn't part of the Vespera corridor's meticulously choreographed aerial ballet. She fumbled for her compad, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. The lights, the luminous drifters as she would later call them, were not just an oddity, they were a story, a disruption in the carefully constructed order of her world. And Kaylin Vance, always drawn to the edges of the known, knew she had to follow it. Back in the sterile, humming confines of Vespera Central, Elias Thorne felt the first tremor of true alarm. It wasn't a blaring siren or a flashing red warning, but a subtle, insidious anomaly in the data stream. A faint, almost imperceptible flicker on a secondary radar screen, a ghost image that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He dismissed it initially as a sensor glitch, a common occurrence in a system of such complexity. But then it happened again and again, each time a fleeting phantom presence that defied categorization. His primary displays, the ones that governed the real-time flow of air traffic, remained stubbornly clear, showing only the familiar, authorized movements. He ran a cross-check, initiating a full system diagnostic on the affected sector. The results came back clean, a perfect bill of health for every sensor, every transponder, every algorithmic filter. Yet, the unease in his gut intensified. He zoomed in on the coordinates where the phantom blips had appeared, scrutinizing the raw data feeds. There was nothing. No transponder signals, no flight plans, no communication logs. It was as if these fleeting presences existed outside the very fabric of the Vespera corridor's meticulously designed airspace control. Elias felt a cold dread begin to coil in his stomach. The system, his system, the one he had dedicated 2 decades of his life to mastering, was blind. It was failing to register something that, by all logical accounts, should not exist. He tried to rationalize it, to find a conventional explanation, perhaps a new, stealth-enabled, military exercise he hadn't been briefed on. Unlikely, given the strict protocols for such operations. A flock of migratory birds? Impossible. The blips were too precise, too consistent in their fleeting appearance. He rubbed his temples, a headache beginning to throb behind his eyes. The perfect symphony of order was not just experiencing a discordant note, it was facing an entirely new, unwritten melody that his instruments couldn't even detect. The realization was chilling. Whatever was out there, it was moving through their airspace with impunity, utterly invisible to the very technology designed to prevent such intrusions. The Vespera corridor, for the first time in its history, was vulnerable, and Elias Thorne, the guardian of its skies, was powerless to stop it. High above the spires, where the city's elite resided in gleaming towers that pierced the clouds, the luminous drifters began to coalesce. What Caelan Vance had observed as a loose cluster of lights now started to exhibit a more deliberate, almost organic pattern. They moved with a slow, stately procession, drawing closer to one another, their individual luminosities merging into a larger, more defined form. It was not a sudden, dramatic convergence, but a gradual, mesmerizing dance, each orb finding its place within an emerging geometric configuration. From the ground, observers in the spires, initially captivated by the strange, silent lights, now watched with a growing sense of awe and apprehension as the formation solidified. The individual lights, steady and unwavering, began to pulse with a faint, synchronized rhythm, a silent beat that seemed to resonate not through sound, but through the very air itself. The air around them, previously clear and crisp, now seemed to shimmer, distorting the distant city lights into wavering streaks. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being subtly altered in their presence. The formation, once a mere collection of points, now resembled a vast, intricate constellation, alien and beautiful, suspended impossibly above the heart of the Vespera corridor. It hung there, silent and immense, a defiant challenge to the meticulously ordered skies below. Panic, a slow-burning ember began to ignite across the city. The initial curiosity of Caelan Vance, the professional unease of Elias Thorne, was now giving way to a collective bewilderment. Compads, previously filled with mundane chatter, now buzzed with frantic calls. Social feeds, usually awash with trivialities, exploded with grainy images and breathless accounts of the phenomenon. The luminous drifters, or ethel orbs as some were already beginning to call them, were no longer a localized oddity. They were a spectacle, a monumental presence that commanded the attention of an entire metropolis. Their silent, unyielding formation over the spires was a stark, undeniable declaration. Something profound and utterly inexplicable had arrived in the Vespera corridor, and the world, as its inhabitants knew it, was about to change. The first chapter of this new reality had been written in light, and its echoes would reverberate far beyond the confines of this single, silent night. Chapter 2. The Unraveling Sky. The silent spectacle above the spires had shattered the Vespera corridor's illusion of impenetrable order. What began as a curious anomaly for Kaelin Vance and a disturbing data glitch for Elias Thorne had now escalated into a full-blown public event broadcast across every personal compad and public display. The luminous drifters, now a colossal, pulsating constellation of light, hung motionless, a defiant sentinel against the inky canvas of the night. Their presence was a physical impossibility, a direct affront to every principle of aerodynamics, every regulation of controlled airspace, and every assumption about the predictable nature of their world. The initial bewilderment had curdled into a potent cocktail of fear and fascination. Spreading like wildfire through the sprawling metropolis below comma in the residential districts of the spires, the initial awe had given way to a nervous murmur. Windows, once dark, now glowed with the faces of residents, their eyes fixed on the impossible formation. Compads, usually buzzing with the mundane, were now choked with frantic calls to emergency services, none of whom had any answers. The city's automated public address system, designed for weather alerts and traffic advisories, remained eerily silent, its algorithms unable to process an event of this magnitude. The carefully constructed facade of control was cracking, revealing the raw, exposed nerves of a society suddenly confronted with the utterly unknown. The air, once sharp with the promise of winter, now felt heavy, charged with an unspoken question. What were they, and what did they want? In the bustling plazas of Silver Reach, where Kaelin Vance had first glimpsed the lights, a different kind of chaos was brewing. People spilled out of cafes and apartments, their faces upturned, their voices a cacophony of speculation and alarm. Kaelin, her compad clutched in her hand, was already dictating notes, her journalistic instincts overriding the primal fear that tugged at her. This was bigger than any expose on hydro-processing plants. This was the story of a lifetime, a seismic shift in the collective consciousness of Oak Haven. But even as she documented the unfolding drama, a chilling thought began to take root. If these objects could defy every known law, what else could they do? The Vespera corridor, a bastion of technological supremacy, was suddenly very small, very fragile, and very much at the mercy of an unraveling sky. Elias Thorne watched the main display, his face a mask of grim determination. The phantom blips he had dismissed earlier were no longer fleeting. They were a persistent, unyielding presence, a cluster of non-existent data points that mocked the sophistication of Vespera central systems. His console, usually a symphony of responsive data, was now a frustrating tableau of green lights and system nominal readouts, all lying. The luminous drifters, clearly visible to the naked eye from countless vantage points across the corridor, remained stubbornly invisible to his advanced radar and transponder networks. It was an impossible paradox, a technological blind spot that threatened to unravel everything he knew. He barked orders into his headset, his voice tight with suppressed frustration. Run a full spectrum analysis on Sector Gamma 7, cross-reference with visual confirmations from public feeds. His team, a group of highly trained professionals, moved with practiced efficiency, but their faces mirrored his own growing despair. The algorithms designed to identify and track every airborne object returned nothing. The public feeds, however, were a torrent of raw, unfiltered data, blurry videos, frantic voice recordings, and eyewitness accounts, all confirming the impossible. The drifters were there, massive and undeniable, yet they left no digital footprint, no electronic signature that Vespera Central could interpret. Elias felt a cold sweat prickle his brow. The implications were staggering. If these objects could move through their airspace undetected, what else could they do? The Vespera corridor, with its meticulously regulated skies, was suddenly exposed, its technological defenses rendered useless against an adversary that simply didn't register. He thought of his brother Aris, the physicist, with his theories about non-kinetic propulsion and energy fields. Elias had always dismissed Aris's more esoteric ideas as academic musings, far removed from the practical realities of air traffic control. Now he wondered if Aris's strange theories might hold the key to understanding the impossible phenomenon unfolding above them. The orderly world of data and protocols was collapsing, and Elias Thorne, the steadfast guardian of the skies, found himself adrift in a sea of the unknown. Kaylin Vance, her compad now a lifeline to the unfolding chaos, navigated the increasingly agitated crowds in Silver Reach. The initial awe had given way to a palpable tension, a collective anxiety that hummed beneath the surface of frantic chatter. She recorded snippets of conversations, captured the wide-eyed expressions of onlookers, and snapped photos of the distant, impossible formation above the spires. Her fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, drafting initial reports, trying to make sense of the senseless. This wasn't just a story, it was a societal tremor, and she was determined to be at its epicenter. Her first attempts to contact official channels were met with a wall of silence. The Vespera Corridor Emergency Services line was jammed. The automated response a loop of generic advisories. The local precinct, usually quick to issue statements on even minor disturbances, offered only a terse, "No comment at this time, an investigation is underway." It was the classic bureaucratic stonewall, a familiar tactic designed to control the narrative. But Kaylin knew better. Official silence often meant official confusion, or worse, official complicity. The lack of information only fueled her resolve. She pushed through a throng of bewildered citizens, her gaze fixed on the distant lights. The luminous drifters, still holding their impossible formation, seemed to mock the frantic activity below. They were a silent, unyielding question mark etched against the night sky, and Kaylin felt an urgent need to find the answer. She knew that the official narrative, when it finally emerged, would be carefully crafted, sanitized, and likely incomplete. Her job, as she saw it, was to uncover the truth, to give voice to the questions that pulsed in the hearts of the people around her. The Vespera Corridor had always prided itself on its transparency and control, but tonight both were dissolving under the silent gaze of the ethel orbs. Kaylin knew this was just the beginning, and she was ready to dig. As the luminous drifters continued their silent vigil above the spires, the Republic of Oakhaven's meticulously crafted image of order began to fray. Hours after the initial sightings, a terse, pre-recorded message finally crackled across public comm channels and digital billboards. It was Director Valerius, head of the Oakhaven Security Bureau, OSB, his face a grim, unyielding mask. He spoke of an unforeseen atmospheric anomaly, assured the public that all necessary protocols were being followed, and urged citizens to remain calm and await further instructions. The message was devoid of specifics, offered no explanation for the lights, and conspicuously avoided any mention of the objects themselves. It was a statement designed to reassure, but it only served to amplify the growing unease. The public's reaction was swift and largely negative. The Vespera corridor's citizens, accustomed to immediate and precise information, found the vague assurances insulting. Social feeds, already ablaze with speculation, erupted in a firestorm of outrage and fear. Hashtags like #what are they and #OSB lies trended across the network. Experts, self-proclaimed and legitimate, flooded the digital sphere with theories ranging from advanced military prototypes to extraterrestrial visitation. The official narrative, thin and unconvincing, was being drowned out by a chorus of distrust and confusion. The very systems designed to maintain public order were now struggling to contain the burgeoning chaos. In the bustling markets of Iron Basin, where the working class toiled beneath the perpetual glow of industrial lights, the mood was particularly volatile. Whispers of government cover-ups and secret projects spread rapidly. The drifters, once a distant spectacle, now felt like a direct threat, a symbol of the unknown encroaching upon their hard-won stability. Small groups began to gather, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and anger, their gazes fixed on the distant silent lights. The carefully maintained social contract of the Vespera corridor, built on trust in authority and technological supremacy, was under immense strain. Director Valerius's attempt to quell the rising tide of panic had, ironically, only served to accelerate its momentum, proving that in the face of the truly inexplicable, even the most powerful institutions could falter, as the night deepened, and the luminous drifters maintained their unwavering formation, a new, more unsettling phenomenon began to manifest. It was subtle at first, easily dismissed as a trick of the light or a malfunction of aging technology. In the high-rise apartments of the spires, where residents had gathered at their windows, compads and personal data slates began to flicker, their screens momentarily pixelating before returning to normal. Automated domestic units, usually humming with quiet efficiency, would occasionally stutter, their programmed routines briefly interrupted. It was not a widespread outage nor a catastrophic failure, but a series of minor, localized disturbances like ripples spreading from an unseen stone dropped into a calm pond. Elias Thorne, still glued to his console at Vespera Central, noticed a peculiar, almost imperceptible hum emanating from the very structure of the control tower itself. It was a low-frequency vibration just at the edge of human hearing that seemed to resonate through the floor and up into his bones. His coffee cup, left on a nearby surface, vibrated with a faint, continuous tremor. He glanced at his colleagues, but they seemed oblivious, still engrossed in their futile attempts to track the untrackable. The hum wasn't loud enough to cause alarm, but it was persistent, a new, unwelcome addition to the familiar symphony of the control room. It felt wrong. Kaylin Vance, attempting to upload her initial report from a public data terminal in Silver Reach, found her connection intermittently dropping. The terminal, usually robust and reliable, struggled to maintain a stable link. She noticed other people around her experiencing similar issues, their compads freezing, their holographic displays glitching. A collective sigh of frustration rippled through the crowd. It was as if the very air, charged with the presence of the ether orbs, was interfering with the delicate electronic web that underpinned their society. The luminous drifters were not just a visual spectacle, they were an active, if subtle, force, subtly unraveling the technological tapestry of the Vespera corridor. The implications were chilling. If these objects could disrupt their technology without even trying, what would happen if they truly intended to interact? The night, already filled with the impossible, was slowly revealing its deeper, more insidious mysteries. Chapter 3: The First Echoes. The dawn of November 15th, 2023, did not bring the usual promise of a new day to the Vespera corridor. Instead, it unveiled a sky still dominated by the impossible. The luminous drifters, their ethereal glow softened by the encroaching daylight, remained suspended above the spires, a silent, monumental question mark against the pale, morning sky. What had been a nocturnal spectacle for a few had now become an undeniable reality for all. The city, usually a symphony of waking activity, stirred with a new, unsettling rhythm, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a burgeoning sense of collective vulnerability. The carefully curated illusion of control, so central to the Republic of Oakhaven's identity, had been irrevocably shattered. From the highest residential towers and the grimy streets of Iron Basin, every eye was drawn upward. Compads, once filled with personal schedules and market updates, now displayed a relentless stream of news feeds, all grappling with the same inexplicable event. The official channels, still struggling to formulate a coherent response, were quickly overwhelmed by citizen-generated content, blurry photos, shaky videos, and impassioned pleas for answers. The digital world, usually a tool for connection and commerce, had transformed into a chaotic forum of speculation and fear. The luminous drifters had not just appeared in the sky, they had landed squarely in the collective consciousness of the Vespera corridor, demanding attention, demanding an explanation. Kaylin Vance, having spent a sleepless night compiling her initial observations, watched the sunrise paint the drifters in hues of silver and grey. Her article, hastily written but fiercely accurate, was already circulating through independent news networks, a stark contrast to the official silence. She knew this was just the beginning. The city was waking up to a new reality, one where the familiar rules no longer applied. The echoes of the silent arrival were just beginning to reverberate, and their sound promised to reshape everything. Elias Thorne felt the weight of the new day like a physical burden. He hadn't left Vespera Central, opting instead for a brief, restless doze in his chair, the hum of the consoles a constant, unsettling lullaby. The morning light, filtering through the reinforced windows, did little to dispel the gloom. The luminous drifters were still there, a stark, undeniable presence on the main display, even if the system still refused to acknowledge their existence beyond the visual feeds. His team, haggard and red-eyed, moved with a quiet efficiency born of exhaustion and shared bewilderment. The air traffic, though significantly reduced due to the ongoing anomaly, still required meticulous management, a fragile semblance of normalcy in a world turned upside down. Director Valerius, his face etched with a mixture of fatigue and barely concealed fury, arrived shortly after dawn. His presence, usually a source of calm authority, now radiated an almost desperate tension. He convened an emergency briefing, the holographic conference table glowing with maps and data that offered no answers. "We have no transponder signals, no heat signatures, no discernible propulsion," Valerius stated. His voice clipped and strained. "Our best analysis suggests they are not of conventional terrestrial origin, nor do they match any known military or experimental craft." The words hung heavy in the air, a chilling admission of ignorance from the Republic's highest security official. Elias watched the faces of his colleagues, seeing his own fear reflected in their eyes. The system, their infallible system, had failed them completely. The official response, when it finally came, was a carefully worded statement of ongoing investigation and a plea for public cooperation. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic evasion, designed to calm without informing, to acknowledge without explaining. But Elias knew with a sinking certainty that the public would not be placated. The luminous drifters had exposed a fundamental flaw in their perceived invincibility, a gaping hole in their technological shield. And as he looked at the silent, impossible forms still dominating the sky, he knew that the true challenge was not just understanding what they were, but understanding what their presence meant for the future of the Vespera corridor. Kaylin Vance, fueled by stale coffee and an insatiable drive, was already a step ahead of the official narrative. Her initial report, detailing the luminous drifters' silent arrival and the Vespera corridor's inexplicable blindness to them, had gone viral across the independent news networks. Her compad buzzed incessantly with interview requests, eyewitness accounts, and frantic messages from citizens demanding answers. She had become an unlikely focal point for the public's burgeoning frustration, a voice of reason in a sea of official obfuscation. She moved through the early morning streets of Silver Reach, a portable recorder, capturing the raw, unfiltered reactions of the populace. The initial shock had given way to a simmering anger. People felt betrayed by the very systems designed to protect them. "They tell us everything is under control," one citizen fumed, gesturing wildly towards the distant drifters. "But they can't even tell us what that is." Another, a young tech worker, spoke of the unsettling silence from the government, contrasting it with the immediate, almost instinctive fear that had gripped the city. Kaylin meticulously documented every sentiment, every fear, every accusation. She understood that the story wasn't just about the objects in the sky. It was about the unraveling trust between the people and their institutions. Her focus shifted to the technological disruptions, the flickering compads, the stuttering automated systems. These weren't just minor annoyances, they were symptoms of a deeper vulnerability, a chink in the Vespera corridor's seemingly impenetrable digital armor. She began to connect the dots, realizing that the drifters' presence wasn't merely visual, it was actively interfering with the very infrastructure that defined their modern existence. The official silence on this aspect was particularly damning. Kaylin knew that the truth, whatever it was, lay buried beneath layers of denial and technological incomprehension, and she was determined to dig it out, piece by agonizing piece, for a public desperate for clarity. Far from the public eye, in the secure subterranean labs beneath the Oak Haven National University, Dr. Aris Thorne, Elias's estranged brother, was already engrossed in the data. A physicist specializing in non-kinetic propulsion and exotic energy fields, Aris had always been an outlier, his theories often bordering on the speculative, far removed from the mainstream of applied science. Yet, the moment the first grainy images of the luminous drifters had flickered across his private feed, a jolt of recognition, a terrifying validation had shot through him. These weren't drones, nor were they conventional aircraft. They were something else entirely, something that resonated with the very core of his life's work. His lab, usually a quiet sanctuary of equations and simulations, now buzzed with a frantic energy. He had managed to tap into the raw, unfiltered sensor data from various civilian and industrial sources across the corridor, bypassing the official, sanitized feeds. What he found was both exhilarating and deeply disturbing. The drifters emitted no discernible heat, no electromagnetic signature that fit any known propulsion system. Their movement, though slow, defied inertia, suggesting a manipulation of space-time itself. The subtle technological disruptions reported by citizens, the flickering compads, the stuttering automated systems, were to Aris not malfunctions but evidence of an energy field, a resonance frequency emanating from the objects that interfered with conventional electronics. Meanwhile, in the heavily fortified command center of the Oak Haven Security Bureau, Director Valerius was facing a different kind of challenge. His military advisors, usually confident in their assessments, were at a loss. Conventional intercept protocols were useless against an enemy that couldn't be detected by radar. Fighter jets scrambled to investigate, reported only visual contact, their advanced targeting systems failing to lock on to the ethereal forms. The drifters, though passive, were an undeniable breach of national security, a colossal question mark hanging over the Republic's sovereignty. Valerius knew that the political ramifications of this incident would be immense. The public demanded answers and the international community watched with bated breath. He needed a solution, and he needed it fast. The scientific community, once a distant theoretical entity, was now their only hope, and Aris Thorne, the eccentric physicist, suddenly found himself at the epicenter of a global crisis. Under the direct, albeit reluctant, orders of Director Valerius, the first official attempts to interact with the luminous drifters commenced. From a secure, remote facility on the outskirts of the Vespera corridor, a specialized team of Oakhaven Security Bureau (OSB) scientists and engineers initiated a series of passive scans. They deployed high-frequency sonic emitters, directed focused electromagnetic pulses, and even attempted to establish communication using a broad spectrum of radio frequencies. Each attempt was met with the same profound, unnerving silence. The drifters, still holding their perfect formation above the spires, remained utterly unresponsive, a monument to their own inscrutable purpose. The data, when it finally trickled back to the OSB command center, was baffling. The sonic pulses simply dissipated upon reaching the objects, as if absorbed by an invisible barrier. The electromagnetic pulses, powerful enough to disrupt localized communications, had no discernible effect on the drifters themselves, though they did seem to exacerbate the flickering and glitching of nearby civilian electronics. Attempts at radio communication yielded only static, a white noise that seemed to mock their efforts. It was as if the luminous drifters existed in a different dimension of reality, impervious to their most advanced terrestrial probes. Director Valerius watched the report scroll across his screen, his jaw clenched. The initial hope that these objects might be a sophisticated, albeit unauthorized, terrestrial experiment was rapidly fading. The lack of any response, any measurable interaction, pointed to something far more alien, far more advanced than anything they had ever encountered. The military option, always a last resort, was becoming increasingly untenable. How do you engage an enemy you cannot detect, an adversary that absorbs your attacks without a ripple? The drifters were not just a threat to their airspace, they were a profound challenge to their understanding of physics, of existence itself. The first echoes of their arrival were not just fear and confusion, they were the sound of an entire civilization grappling with its own insignificance in the face of the truly unknown. The Vespera corridor, once a symbol of human mastery, was now a stage for an encounter that would redefine its place in the cosmos. Chapter 4. Converging Paths. The luminous drifters had become the new horizon for the Vespera corridor. Days had bled into a week since their silent arrival, and their unwavering presence above the spires had solidified into a chilling new normal. The initial shock had given way to a pervasive anxiety, a low thrum beneath the city's surface that manifested in countless ways. Public spaces, once bustling, now carried an undercurrent of nervous energy. Conversations inevitably drifted to the sky, to the silent, enigmatic forms that defied explanation. The Republic of Oakhaven, once a beacon of technological prowess and unwavering control, found itself adrift in a sea of uncertainty, its carefully constructed reality unraveling with each passing, unexplained hour. Director Valerius's attempts to manage the narrative had spectacularly backfired. His vague pronouncements and the OSB's continued silence on the drifter's nature only fueled public distrust. The independent news networks, spearheaded by Cailin Vance's relentless reporting, became the primary source of information for a populace hungry for truth. Cailin's articles, raw and unvarnished, resonated with the collective fear and frustration, painting a picture of official incompetence and scientific bewilderment. She had become a reluctant hero, her name whispered in hushed tones in cafes and shouted in defiance at impromptu street gatherings. The drifters had not only altered the sky, they had irrevocably altered the social fabric of the Vespera corridor, igniting a spark of dissent that threatened to consume the established order. Meanwhile, in the sterile confines of Vespera Central, Elias Thorne found himself increasingly isolated. His colleagues, once a cohesive unit, were fractured by stress and the gnawing frustration of their technological impotence. The constant low-frequency hum emanating from the drifters, imperceptible to most, had become a maddening presence for Elias, a constant reminder of his failure to protect the skies he had sworn to guard. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the official narrative was a flimsy veil, barely concealing a profound and terrifying ignorance. The answers, he suspected, lay not in the algorithms and protocols he had mastered, but in the very anomalies they were designed to ignore. His path, once clear and defined, was now veering into uncharted territory, a collision course with the unknown. Elias Thorne's office at Vespera Central had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the cacophony of official pronouncements and public panic could be momentarily muted. He sat hunched over his personal terminal, not reviewing flight plans, but poring over historical atmospheric data, geological surveys, and even ancient folklore. The official reports, meticulously compiled by the OSB, offered no solace. They were filled with technical jargon and inconclusive findings, a bureaucratic fog designed to obscure rather than illuminate. Elias, however, was a man of patterns, of logic, and the current situation defied all logic. The drifters were not just an anomaly, they were a deliberate, intelligent disruption, and the system he served was utterly incapable of comprehending them. The low hum, a constant companion since the drifters' arrival, had begun to manifest in his own body. A persistent ringing in his ears, a subtle tremor in his hands. He found himself sketching complex geometric patterns on discarded data slates, patterns that seemed to echo the impossible formation above. He knew he was teetering on the edge of obsession, but the alternative, accepting the official narrative of an unforeseen atmospheric anomaly, was an intellectual betrayal he could not countenance. His intuition, honed by decades of guiding aircraft through treacherous skies, screamed that something far more profound was at play. The technological disruptions, the selective invisibility to their sensors, the sheer, unwavering presence of the objects. It all pointed to a level of sophistication that dwarfed anything humanity possessed. He thought of Eris, his brilliant, eccentric brother, whose theories had always danced on the fringes of accepted science. Elias had always been the grounded one, the pragmatist, Aris the dreamer, the theoretician. Now, for the first time, Elias wondered if Aris's unconventional perspective might be the only one capable of grasping the truth. The official channels were failing, the established order was crumbling, and Elias Thorne, the man who had always believed in the absolute authority of data, found himself searching for answers in the most unlikely of places, the realm of the unknown, guided by a growing, unsettling suspicion that the truth was far stranger than any fiction. Cailin Vance's apartment, usually a chaotic but organized hub of journalistic activity, had transformed into a war room. Every surface was littered with printouts of official statements, transcripts of public compad chatter, and her own meticulously organized notes. The official news channels, now broadcasting a carefully curated stream of reassuring but ultimately empty reports, were a constant source of frustration. They spoke of interagency cooperation and unprecedented scientific inquiry, but offered no concrete details, no genuine insights into the nature of the luminous drifters. Kalin knew it was a deliberate strategy, a desperate attempt to maintain control in the face of the uncontrollable dot. Her compad, usually a tool for communication, had become a weapon. She was relentless in her pursuit of alternative voices, reaching out to independent scientists, fringe theorists, and even former government employees who might possess a piece of the puzzle. She spent hours sifting through encrypted forums and dark web channels, searching for any hint of dissent, any crack in the official facade. The stories she uncovered were fragmented, often contradictory, but they painted a consistent picture of confusion, fear, and a profound lack of understanding within the highest echelons of the Republic. The technological disruptions initially dismissed as minor glitches were now being reported with increasing frequency and severity, hinting at a deeper, more pervasive influence from the drifters. Kalin felt a growing sense of urgency. The longer the official silence persisted, the more fertile the ground became for misinformation and panic. She understood that the truth, however unsettling, was the only antidote to the fear that was slowly gripping the Vespera corridor. Her journalistic integrity, her very purpose, demanded that she push harder, dig deeper, and expose the uncomfortable realities that the authorities were so desperate to conceal. The drifters were not just a story, they were a catalyst, forcing a reckoning with the very nature of truth and authority in a world that had always prided itself on its unwavering control. Kalin Vance, her compad a blur of incoming messages and outgoing queries, found herself hitting a wall. The official channels remained impenetrable, and the independent sources, while passionate, often lacked the concrete, verifiable data she desperately needed. She needed someone on the inside, someone with access to the raw feeds, someone who understood the intricate dance of the Vespera corridor's airspace. Her thoughts kept returning to the whispers she'd heard, faint echoes from her contacts in the tech sector, about Elias Thorne, the veteran air traffic controller at Vespera Central. They spoke of his unwavering dedication, his almost obsessive attention to detail, and, more recently, a growing disillusionment with the official stance on the drifters. It was a long shot, a risky move. Reaching out to someone within the OSB's operational core was dangerous, both for her and for him. But Kalin's journalistic instincts, sharpened by years of navigating treacherous information landscapes, told her this was the right lead. She spent hours meticulously crafting a message, careful to avoid any language that could be misconstrued or flagged by surveillance algorithms. It was an anonymous, encrypted ping, a subtle probe into the digital darkness, hinting at shared concerns and a mutual desire for truth. She knew that if Elias Thorne was the man she believed him to be, he would understand the unspoken invitation. Hours later, a single encrypted message appeared on her secure channel. It was brief, devoid of identifying markers, but the coordinates and the time were clear. A secluded, abandoned observation deck overlooking the Iron Basin, far from the prying eyes of the spires or the bustling streets of Silver Reach. It was a risk, a leap of faith into the unknown, but Kalin felt a surge of adrenaline, a renewed sense of purpose. The official narrative was crumbling, and the truth, she suspected, was about to find its voice, not through the grand pronouncements of authority, but through the quiet, clandestine meeting of two individuals who refused to be silenced. The paths of the air traffic controller and the investigative journalist, once disparate, were about to converge under the silent gaze of the luminous drifters. Dot. The wind whipped around the abandoned observation deck, carrying the metallic tang of Iron Basin and the distant, almost imperceptible hum that Elias Thorne had come to associate with the luminous drifters. He stood alone, his silhouette stark against the fading twilight, his gaze fixed on the impossible formation still suspended above the spires. The air was cold, but a different kind of chill ran down his spine. The chill of stepping outside the meticulously defined boundaries of his life, of venturing into a realm where protocols offered no guidance and data provided no answers. Dot. He heard her before he saw her, the crunch of gravel underfoot, light and purposeful. Kaylin Vance emerged from the shadows, her figure cloaked against the evening chill, her eyes, even in the dim light, burning with an intense, unwavering curiosity. There was no formal greeting, no awkward pleasantries. The gravity of the situation, the shared understanding of the unspoken, hung heavy between them. Elias turned, his gaze meeting hers, a silent acknowledgement passing between two individuals who had, by circumstance, become unlikely allies. "You saw my message," Kaylin stated, her voice low but firm, cutting through the wind. It wasn't a question. Elias nodded, his eyes still on the drifters. "Your reports, they're the only ones that make sense." He paused, a flicker of something akin to shame crossing his face. "My systems, they see nothing, they register nothing. It's like they're not even there yet." He gestured vaguely towards the sky. Kaylin understood. She had seen the same technological blind spot, the same inexplicable void in the official data. "They're interfering," she supplied, her voice a whisper. "Not aggressively, but fundamentally. They're changing the rules of the game." Elias finally met her gaze fully. A flicker of hope, tentative but real, igniting in his weary eyes. "I need to know what they are and why my own instruments are failing." Kaylin offered a small, determined smile. "And I need to tell the world the truth before the official lies become the only reality." Their paths, once separate threads in the complex tapestry of the Vespera corridor, had finally converged. Under the silent, watchful gaze of the luminous drifters, a fragile alliance was forged, bound by a shared quest for understanding and a desperate need to expose the truth. The echoes of Ethelgard were growing louder, and Elias Thorne and Kaylin Vance were now poised to listen. Chapter 5. Unseen Frequencies. The cold wind that swept across the abandoned observation deck seemed to carry more than just the scent of industry. It carried the weight of a shared secret, a nascent conspiracy. Elias Thorne and Kaylin Vance stood silhouetted against the distant, pulsating glow of the luminous drifters, their alliance forged in the crucible of mutual distrust for the official narrative. The initial awkwardness had dissipated, replaced by a focused intensity. Elias, usually a man of few words outside his professional domain, found himself speaking with an uncharacteristic urgency, detailing the frustrating impotence of Vespera Central systems. Kaylin, ever the meticulous observer, absorbed every detail, her mind already cataloguing potential leads and corroborating evidence. "They're not just invisible to our radar," Elias explained, his voice low, almost a whisper against the wind. "They're actively suppressing or deflecting our signals. It's not a malfunction, it's a deliberate interaction, a countermeasure." He described the phantom blips, the diagnostic failures, the maddening silence from the very instruments designed to detect and identify. Kaylin nodded, recalling the intermittent flickering of compads and the stuttering of automated systems she had witnessed. "The technological disruptions," she mused aloud, "they're not random. They're a side effect of whatever field these drifters are generating. The pieces disparate and confusing in isolation, began to click into place, forming a disturbing mosaic of an intelligence far beyond their current comprehension. Their conversation stretched into the early hours, a clandestine exchange under the watchful, silent gaze of the ethel orbs. Elias, risking his career and possibly his freedom, shared encrypted data logs, raw sensor readings, and his own personal observations. The subtle hum, the persistent ringing in his ears. Kaylin, in turn, provided her extensive network of contacts, her understanding of public sentiment, and her journalistic acumen. They were two sides of the same coin, one steeped in the rigid logic of technology, the other in the fluid art of human perception, both united by the profound anomaly in the sky. The Vespera corridor, for all its advanced surveillance, remained oblivious to the quiet revolution brewing on an abandoned observation deck. A revolution sparked by unseen frequencies and a shared quest for truth. Their first tangible step was a plan to circumvent the OSB's information lockdown. Elias, with his intimate knowledge of Vespera Central's aging, yet still functional legacy systems, proposed a way to access raw, unfiltered data streams that predated the Drifters' arrival. These older systems, often overlooked in favor of newer, more integrated platforms, might still hold echoes of the anomaly, data points that the current compromised systems were now actively ignoring. It was a risky maneuver, requiring him to operate outside established protocols, but the urgency of the situation outweighed the personal risk. He would need Kaylin's help to process the sheer volume of information, to find the needles in the digital haystack. Kaylin, meanwhile, outlined her strategy for mobilizing her network of independent researchers, disillusioned scientists, and even sympathetic government whistleblowers. She believed that the technological disruptions, while subtle, were widespread enough to have been noticed by others. By collating these disparate reports, she hoped to build a more comprehensive picture of the Drifters' influence, to map the unseen frequencies that were subtly altering their reality. She also planned to leverage her public platform, not to spread panic, but to ask the right questions, to gently nudge the public towards a deeper understanding of the official silence. Her goal was to create enough public pressure to force the OSB's hand, to demand transparency where there was only obfuscation. Their collaboration was a delicate dance of trust and suspicion, each testing the other's resolve. Elias, the man of rigid order, found himself relying on the chaotic, intuitive brilliance of a journalist. Kaylin, the lone wolf, found herself trusting a man from the very institution she sought to expose. But as they spoke, the vast, silent presence above them served as a constant, undeniable reminder of the stakes. This wasn't just about a story or a career, it was about the truth, about the future of the Vespera corridor, and perhaps the very definition of their reality. The night, once a canvas for the unknown, was now a crucible for nascent resistance, a quiet rebellion against the silence. Back in the hushed, data-saturated environment of Vespera Central, Elias Thorne moved with a new-found purpose, a clandestine shadow in the heart of the system he served. Under the guise of routine maintenance and system diagnostics, he began to meticulously extract raw data from the legacy archives. These were the deep storage logs, the unfiltered sensor readings from decades past, often deemed too voluminous or too granular for real-time analysis. He focused on the period immediately preceding the Drifters' arrival, searching for any anomalies, any faint whispers that the current compromised systems had overlooked. The process was painstaking, a digital archaeology project. He bypassed firewalls, navigated labyrinthine data structures, and decrypted old protocol, his fingers flying across the holographic interfaces with a surgeon's precision. He was looking for patterns, for deviations from the norm that might indicate a precursor to the luminous Drifter's presence. The hum, that low-frequency vibration that had become his constant companion, seemed to intensify as he delved deeper into the digital past. A subtle resonance between the physical phenomenon and the data he was unearthing. His initial findings were both frustrating and intriguing. The legacy systems, while not directly detecting the drifters, showed a subtle but undeniable increase in unexplained energy fluctuations in the upper atmosphere of the Vespera corridor in the weeks leading up to November 14th. These were not the sharp, distinct spikes of a solar flare or a meteor shower, but rather a diffuse, persistent background radiation, a kind of energetic haze that had slowly permeated their airspace. It was as if the drifters had not simply appeared, but had gradually bled into their reality, their presence subtly altering the very fabric of the environment before they became visually manifest. Elias knew this was just the tip of the iceberg, but it was a crucial piece of evidence, a silent testament to the drifters' unseen influence, a truth that the official narrative was desperately trying to suppress. While Elias delved into the digital past, Kaylin Vance was immersed in the chaotic present. Her apartment, now a makeshift command center, buzzed with the energy of her growing network. She had put out a call, a carefully worded plea for information, not just about visual sightings, but about any unusual technological glitches, any strange sensations, any deviations from the norm that citizens had experienced since the drifters' arrival. The response was overwhelming. Her secure channels were flooded with messages, each one a small piece of the larger, unsettling puzzle. She meticulously catalogued the reports, cross-referencing them with the time and location of the luminous drifters' movements. What emerged was a disturbing pattern. The flickering compads, the erratic behavior of automated vehicles, the inexplicable power fluctuations. These incidents were not random. They clustered around the drifters' projected flight paths, intensifying as the objects drew closer, diminishing as they moved away. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible influence, but it was undeniably there, a silent hum affecting the very infrastructure of the Vespera corridor. Kaylin realized that the drifters were not just passive observers, they were active participants, their presence subtly reshaping the technological landscape. Among the deluge of messages, a few stood out. A retired engineer from Iron Basin reported his home automation system behaving erratically, playing music at odd hours and adjusting climate controls without input. A student in Silver Reach described her holographic projector displaying distorted images, almost as if an unseen force was bending the light. These weren't just glitches, they were echoes, subtle reverberations of the drifters' unseen frequencies. Kaylin felt a surge of excitement. This was the tangible evidence she needed, the proof that the official narrative was not just incomplete, but actively misleading. The truth, she realized, was not just in the sky, but woven into the very fabric of their daily lives, waiting to be uncovered. Their next clandestine meeting took place in a forgotten corner of the sprawling Vespera Public Library, amidst dusty archives and the hushed whispers of forgotten knowledge. Elias, his face etched with fatigue but alight with a new kind of fervor, presented his findings. He projected the raw data onto a small, portable display, the subtle energy fluctuations, the diffuse background radiation that had preceded the drifters' arrival. "It's not a sudden appearance," he explained, his voice low and intense. "They've been here in some form for weeks, gradually building up like a pressure system before a storm." Kaylin, in turn, shared her collated reports from the public. The flickering compads, the erratic automated systems, the strange hums and distortions. She overlaid her data onto Elias's energy maps, and a chilling correlation emerged. The areas with the highest reported technological disruptions perfectly matched the zones of increased energy fluctuation. "They're not just flying," Kaylin concluded, her voice barely a whisper. "They're resonating. They're changing, the very electromagnetic environment around them. Our technology isn't just failing to see them, it's being actively, if unintentionally, influenced by them. The realization hung heavy in the air between them. The luminous drifters were not merely objects in the sky. They were a pervasive environmental force, subtly reshaping the physical and technological landscape of the Vespera corridor. Their presence was a silent, ongoing experiment, and humanity was the unwitting subject. Elias looked at the data, then at Kalen, a profound understanding dawning in his eyes. "This isn't just about air traffic control anymore," he said, the weight of his words echoing in the quiet library. "This is about everything." Kalen nodded, her gaze fixed on the glowing display, the intricate patterns of unseen frequencies. The echoes of Ethelgard were not just a distant phenomenon, they were a fundamental shift, a new reality that demanded not just observation, but a complete re-evaluation of their place in the universe. Their investigation had just begun, and the true scope of the mystery was only now beginning to reveal itself. Chapter 6. The Resonance. Cascade, the Vespera Public Library, a bastion of quiet contemplation, had become an unlikely command center for a burgeoning rebellion against ignorance. Elias Thorne and Kalen Vance, huddled amidst towering stacks of forgotten knowledge, felt the weight of their discovery. The luminous drifters were not just a visual anomaly, they were a pervasive environmental force, subtly reshaping the very fabric of the Vespera corridor. The energy fluctuations Elias had unearthed from legacy data, combined with Kalen's meticulously catalogued reports of technological disruptions, painted a chilling picture. The drifters were emitting a resonant frequency, an unseen wave that interfered with their technology, not aggressively, but fundamentally. It was a silent invasion, a redefinition of reality that bypassed their defenses and infiltrated their daily lives. Their shared realization had solidified their alliance, transforming a cautious collaboration into a desperate partnership. Elias, the pragmatic air traffic controller, found himself embracing the speculative, the theoretical, driven by the undeniable evidence of his own failing systems. Kalen, the relentless journalist, now saw her mission extend beyond mere reporting. She was a chronicler of a new epoch, an interpreter of the unseen. The hum, that low-frequency vibration that had become Elias's constant companion, now seemed to resonate with Kalen too. A subtle pressure behind her ears, a faint tremor in her fingertips as she typed. It was as if the drifters were not just influencing their technology, but subtly altering their very perception, drawing them deeper into their enigmatic world. The city outside remained a hive of activity, a testament to humanity's resilience and its capacity for denial. But for Elias and Kalen, the world had irrevocably shifted. The familiar skyline, once a symbol of human achievement, was now dominated by the silent, impossible forms above the spires, a constant reminder of their newfound vulnerability. The echoes of Ethelgard were no longer distant whispers. They were a growing chorus, a resonance cascade that threatened to unravel the very foundations of their understanding. Their investigation had just begun, and the true scope of the mystery was only now beginning to reveal itself, not as a singular event, but as a profound, systemic transformation. The implications of the resonance cascade were staggering. Elias, his face pale in the dim library light, traced the energy patterns on the portable display. "It's like a blanket," he murmured, "a field that's subtly altering the electromagnetic spectrum. Our sensors are designed to filter out noise, to focus on specific frequencies, but if the noise itself is changing the rules, if it's shifting the very definition of what's normal, then our filters become blind spots. He explained how the drifter's resonant frequency wasn't a destructive force, but a transformative one, subtly bending the laws of physics within its sphere of influence. This explained why their technology wasn't outright failing, but rather glitching, flickering, and behaving erratically. It was trying to operate in a subtly altered reality. Kalen, Ever, the pragmatist, immediately grasped the societal ramifications. If our technology is being influenced, what about us? She asked, her voice laced with concern. Are these echoes affecting human perception, cognition? Elias admitted it was a terrifying possibility. The persistent hum, the subtle cognitive dissonance he felt, could be more than just stress. It could be a direct effect of the drifter's presence. Their conversation inevitably turned to Aris Thorne, Elias's estranged brother. Aris, with his unconventional theories on non-kinetic propulsion and exotic energy fields, was perhaps the only one who could truly understand the science behind this phenomenon. Elias had always been wary of Aris's more speculative work, but now, faced with an impossible reality, he knew he had no other choice. I need to talk to him, Elias stated, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. He's the only one who might have a framework for this. Kaylin nodded, her expression grim. It's a risk. The OSB will be watching him closely, especially after his past research. But the risk was necessary. The luminous drifters were not just a mystery. They were a profound challenge to their understanding of the universe, and Aris Thorne, the scientific outlier, was their best hope for deciphering its language. The library, once a refuge, now felt like a launching pad, propelling them towards a confrontation with a truth far stranger than any fiction. Elias Thorne's compad felt heavy in his hand, a direct line to a past he had deliberately kept at arm's length. Calling Aris was an admission of defeat, a surrender to the very unconventional thinking he had always resisted. He found a secluded corner in the library, the scent of old paper a faint comfort. The call connected, a familiar, slightly tinny voice answering. Elias? To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Aris Thorne's tone was laced with a dry wit, a subtle jab at their long-standing estrangement. Elias cut straight to the chase, his voice devoid of pleasantries. He described the luminous drifters, the technological blindness, the energy fluctuations, and the resonance cascade. He spoke of the subtle hum, the pervasive influence, the way their systems were being subtly yet fundamentally altered. There was a long silence on the other end, a silence that Elias knew was not skepticism, but intense, focused thought. Aris had always processed information differently, his mind a whirlwind of abstract concepts and theoretical possibilities. Non-kinetic resonance, space-time distortion, a localized field effect, Aris mused, his voice gaining a familiar academic intensity. It aligns with some of my earlier work on ether fields, though the scale, the sheer magnitude is unprecedented. Elias felt a flicker of relief. Aris wasn't dismissing him. He was engaging. I need your help, Aris. Our instruments are blind. Our protocols are useless. You're the only one who might understand what we're dealing with. Aris's reply was immediate, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a single, decisive word. Intriguing. Send me everything you have, and be discreet, brother. The OSB has a long memory for unorthodox theories. The conversation ended, leaving Elias with a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Aris was willing to help, but also a renewed sense of dread. Aris's involvement meant delving deeper into the unknown, into a realm where the rules of science, as they knew them, might no longer apply. But as he looked out the library window, towards the distant silent forms above the spires, he knew that the conventional path had already failed. Their only hope lay in the unconventional, in the mind of a physicist who had always dared to ask the questions no one else would. Caelan Vance watched Elias's face as he ended the call with his brother. A complex mix of relief, apprehension, and a strange, almost childlike hope flickered across his features. "He's in." Elias confirmed, his voice a low murmur. "He wants all the data. He thinks he might have a framework for this." Caelan felt a surge of cautious optimism. A physicist, especially one with a reputation for unconventional thinking, was exactly what they needed. The official scientific community, bound by peer review and established paradigms, was too slow, too rigid to grapple with something so fundamentally alien. However, her journalistic instincts immediately raised a red flag. Aris Thorne, she mused, recalling the whispers and rumors that had occasionally surfaced about the eccentric physicist. The one who proposed the Ethel field theory? The OSB practically blacklisted him for that, Elias nodded grimly. Precisely, which means we have to be even more careful. If they find out he's involved, they'll shut him down, and us with him. The stakes had just been raised. Their clandestine operation, already fraught with risk, now involved a figure who was already on the OSB's radar. Meanwhile, the public unrest continued to simmer, threatening to boil over. Caelan's compad was a constant source of updates, reports of localized protests in Iron Basin, demands for transparency from citizen groups in Silver Reach, and a growing chorus of voices questioning Director Valerius's leadership. The technological disruptions, while still subtle, were becoming more frequent and noticeable, fueling the public's anxiety. A major transit hub in Silver Reach had experienced a complete system blackout for several minutes, causing widespread delays and panic. The official explanation, a localized power surge, was met with widespread derision. Caelan knew that the window for a peaceful resolution was rapidly closing. The luminous drifters were not just a scientific enigma, they were a political powder keg, and the fuse was burning fast. The library's digital clock chimed, signaling the approach of dawn. Elias and Caelan knew their time was running out. The OSB, though seemingly blind to the drifters' true nature, was far from inactive. Director Valerius, despite his public facade of calm, was undoubtedly tightening his grip, searching for any leaks, any dissent within his ranks. Their alliance with Aris, while promising, also brought with it a heightened risk. They were now operating on multiple fronts, deciphering the drifters' mystery, managing public perception, and evading the watchful eyes of the Republic's security apparatus. Their immediate plan was clear. Elias would continue to funnel raw data to Aris, focusing on the energy signatures and the precise timing of the technological disruptions. He would also attempt to identify any patterns in the drifters' movements that might correlate with the resonance frequencies Aris was investigating. Caelan, armed with Elias's insights and Aris's theoretical framework, would continue to expose the inconsistencies in the official narrative, using her platform to demand genuine transparency. She would also begin to discreetly contact other scientists and engineers, those who might be experiencing similar unexplained phenomena, building a network of independent researchers who could corroborate Aris's theories. As they parted ways, a sense of grim determination settled over them. The luminous drifters, still a silent, enigmatic presence above the spires, were no longer just a phenomenon to be observed. They were a challenge to be met, a truth to be uncovered. The echoes of Aethelgard were growing louder, demanding not just attention, but action. Elias returned to Vespera Central, a ghost in the machine, his loyalty now divided between the system he served and the truth he sought. Caelan vanished into the waking city, her compad a beacon of defiance, ready to wage her war of information. The Republic of Oakhaven unknowingly stood on the precipice of a profound transformation, its fate now intertwined with the clandestine efforts of an air traffic controller, a journalist, and an eccentric physicist, all united against the silent, resonant power of the unseen. Chapter 7. The Unseen Web. In the secluded, almost forgotten laboratory beneath the Oakhaven National University, Dr. Aris Thorne was a man possessed. The raw data Elias had funneled to him, the energy fluctuations, the subtle electromagnetic distortions, the precise timings of technological glitches, was a treasure trove, a symphony of the impossible that resonated deeply with his life's work. His lab, usually a haven of quiet, theoretical exploration, now hummed with a frantic energy, the holographic displays flickering with complex algorithms and spectral analyses. He moved between terminals, his mind a whirlwind of equations and hypotheses, his long, slender fingers dancing across keyboards, extracting patterns from the chaos dot. He had always believed in the existence of ethal fields, a theoretical construct of resonant energy that could subtly influence space-time and matter. Mainstream science had dismissed it as fringe, speculative, unprovable. But now, suspended above the Vespera corridor, was the undeniable proof. The luminous drifters were not just emitting a frequency, they were creating a localized ethal field, a bubble of altered reality that explained their invisibility to conventional sensors and their subtle, pervasive influence on technology. The hum Elias felt, the flickering compads Kalin documented. These were not malfunctions, but direct interactions with this unseen web of energy. Aris felt a thrill of intellectual triumph, quickly tempered by a profound sense of dread. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. The drifters were not just an isolated phenomenon, they were a manifestation of a fundamental force, a force that had now anchored itself in the heart of the Republic of Oakhaven. His initial analysis suggested that the field was not static. It was subtly expanding, its resonant frequencies slowly permeating the very infrastructure of the Vespera corridor. The implications were staggering, not just for physics, but for the very nature of their reality. The unseen web was tightening, and Aris Thorne, the eccentric physicist, was now caught in its intricate resonant threads in the heavily fortified command center of the Oakhaven Security Bureau. Director Valerius was a man under siege. The luminous drifters, still a silent, unyielding presence above the spires, had become a symbol of his agency's impotence, a glaring testament to the Republic's vulnerability. Public unrest, fueled by Kalin Vance's relentless reporting and the persistent technological glitches, was spiraling out of control. The carefully constructed facade of order was crumbling, and Valerius knew that if he didn't regain control of the narrative, and soon his career, and perhaps the stability of the entire Republic, would be irrevocably compromised. His holographic displays, usually filled with classified intelligence and strategic projections, now pulsed with a relentless stream of public sentiment analysis, approval ratings plummeting, social media sentiment overwhelmingly negative, and a growing number of calls for his resignation. He slammed his fist on the console, the metallic thud echoing in the tense silence of the room. "Find the source of these leaks," he roared, his voice raw with frustration. "Who is feeding this journalist? And what is this ethal field nonsense I'm hearing about?" His intelligence officers, their faces grim, reported increased chatter about an unconventional physicist and a rogue air traffic controller collaborating with the independent media. Valerius felt a cold fury ignite within him. He had always prided himself on his ability to control information, to manage crises with a firm, decisive hand. But these drifters, these impossible objects, had thrown a wrench into every one of his carefully laid plans. He initiated a full-spectrum surveillance sweep, targeting not just known dissidents, but anyone connected to the independent media, anyone expressing skepticism about the official narrative. He knew that the truth, whatever it was, had to be contained. The Republic could not afford to appear weak, to admit its ignorance in the face of such an unprecedented threat. The unseen web of the drifters' influence was growing, but so too was the OSB's own, far more tangible web of surveillance and control. Valerius was determined to weave it tighter, to choke off the flow of dissenting information, no matter the cost. Aris Thorne, oblivious to his brother's growing peril, and Director Valerius's escalating surveillance, was deep in the throes of scientific discovery. His lab, usually a solitary pursuit, now felt like a race against time. He had managed to construct a rudimentary model of the ether field, a complex multidimensional construct that explained the drifters' unique properties. The field, he theorized, was not merely a byproduct of their presence, but their very essence, a form of localized space-time manipulation that allowed them to exist outside conventional physics. This explained their invisibility to radar, their lack of heat signatures, and their subtle, resonant influence on electronics. His initial attempts to communicate these findings were met with a familiar wall of skepticism. He tried to reach out to former colleagues and to academic journals, but the official narrative, carefully crafted by the OSB, had already taken root. His theories, once dismissed as fringe, were now actively suppressed, labeled as dangerous misinformation. He understood the fear. The implications of his findings were truly paradigm-shifting. If the drifters could manipulate space-time, then their understanding of the universe, of energy, of even life itself, was fundamentally flawed. It was a truth too profound, too unsettling, for the established order to readily accept. Frustrated, but undeterred, Aris turned his attention to the practical applications of his theory. If the drifters were generating an ether field, could he, in turn, detect its subtle fluctuations, perhaps even predict its movements? He began to recalibrate his own experimental equipment, adapting it to detect the specific resonant frequencies he had identified. He knew that his brother Elias and the journalist Kalen were his only hope for disseminating this information, for breaking through the wall of official silence. The unseen web of the drifters' influence was complex, but Aris Thorne, with his unconventional mind, was slowly beginning to unravel its intricate design. Piece by agonizing piece, Kalen Vance felt the tightening grip of Director Valerius's surveillance. Her secure channels, once a reliable conduit for information, were now experiencing intermittent interference, her compad occasionally displaying cryptic error messages. It was a subtle but unmistakable sign that the OSB was actively trying to disrupt her operations, to silence her voice. Yet, instead of deterring her, it only fueled her resolve. The more they tried to suppress the truth, the more convinced she became that she was on the right track. She continued to publish, using a network of anonymous drops and encrypted relays, her articles now focusing not just on the drifters, but on the OSB's blatant attempts at censorship and control. She highlighted the inconsistencies in official statements, the glaring omissions, and the chilling parallels between the technological disruptions and the government's information lockdown. Her readership, already substantial, swelled with each new exposé, transforming her from a respected journalist into a symbol of resistance against an increasingly authoritarian regime. The public, starved for genuine information, devoured her reports, sharing them across secure networks, bypassing the official filters. Kalen also worked tirelessly to expand her network of independent voices. She connected with disillusioned scientists, former military personnel, and even low-level OSB analysts who, disturbed by the official narrative, were willing to risk their careers to share what they knew. These contacts, often operating in the shadows, provided her with invaluable insights, corroborating Elias's data and Aris's theories. The unseen web of the drifter's influence was being mirrored by an unseen web of human connection, a clandestine alliance forming in the digital underbelly of the Vespera corridor. Kaelin knew that the fight for truth would be long and arduous, but with each new piece of information, each new ally, she felt the tide slowly beginning to turn. The echoes of Ethelgard were not just a scientific mystery, they were a call to arms. And Kaelin Vance was ready to answer, back in Vespera Central. Elias Thorne felt the walls closing in. The subtle hum, once a mere annoyance, had intensified, a constant, low thrum that vibrated through his bones and echoed in his skull. His colleagues, once oblivious, now cast nervous glances his way, their whispers hushed when he approached. Director Valerius's surveillance sweep had not gone unnoticed. Elias found his access to certain legacy systems restricted, his communications monitored, and his every move scrutinized. He was a ghost in his own machine, a pariah in the very control room he had dedicated his life to. The pressure was immense. He was constantly aware of the eyes on him, the algorithms analyzing his every keystroke and his every spoken word. Yet the urgency of his mission, the profound implications of Aris's initial findings, outweighed his personal fear. He continued to funnel data to his brother using increasingly complex encryption and circuitous routes, a digital cat and mouse game played out in the shadows of the Vespera Corridor's network. Each successful data transfer was a small victory, a defiant act against the encroaching darkness of official suppression. His internal conflict was a constant battle. He was a man of order, of rules, of protocols. Yet he was actively subverting the very system he had sworn to uphold. The luminous drifters, those silent, impossible forms above the spires, had forced him to question everything. The truth, he realized, was not always found within the established frameworks. Sometimes it lay beyond, in the uncharted territories of the unknown. He thought of Kaelin, her fierce determination, her unwavering commitment to exposing the truth. He thought of Aris, his brilliant, eccentric brother, whose theories were now proving to be terrifyingly accurate. Elias Thorne, the steadfast guardian of the skies, was no longer just an air traffic controller. He was a reluctant revolutionary, caught in the unseen web of the drifter's influence, fighting for a truth that threatened to unravel the very fabric of his world. The echoes of Ethelgard were growing louder, and Elias knew, with a chilling certainty, that the point of no return was rapidly approaching. Chapter 8. The Unveiling. Resonance. In the subterranean sanctuary of his lab, Aris Thorne was no longer merely analyzing data. He was communing with it. The raw streams from Elias, combined with his own refined instruments, were painting an increasingly vivid picture of the ethel field. It was not a simple energy emission, but a complex, multi-layered phenomenon, a symphony of unseen frequencies that resonated with the very fabric of reality. His holographic displays, once filled with abstract equations, now pulsed with shimmering visualizations of the field, a mesmerizing, intricate web of light and shadow that seemed to breathe with an alien intelligence. He had developed a new suite of algorithms, a kind of digital Rosetta Stone, that allowed him to translate the drifter's resonant frequencies into discernible patterns, revealing a logic, a structure that defied all conventional physics. He discovered that the ethel field was not uniform. It possessed nodes, points of intensified resonance, and channels, pathways, along which its influence flowed. These nodes correlated precisely with the areas of the most severe technological disruptions Kaelin had reported. The flickering compads, the stuttering automated systems, the strange hums. These were not random glitches, but localized manifestations of the field's interaction with human technology. It was as if the drifters were not just present, but actively, albeit passively, engaging with their environment, their very existence causing a ripple effect through the Vespera corridor's intricate infrastructure. Aris felt a profound sense of awe, tinged with a growing unease. This was not just a scientific discovery, it was an encounter with a fundamentally different form of intelligence, one that communicated not through words, but through the subtle manipulation of reality itself. His lab, once a quiet refuge, now felt like the epicenter of a silent revolution. He worked tirelessly, driven by a relentless curiosity and a growing sense of urgency. The implications of his findings were staggering. If the drifters could subtly alter the electromagnetic spectrum, what else could they do? Could they influence biological systems? Could they reshape matter? The questions spiraled, each more profound than the last. The unseen web of the ethel field was not just a scientific curiosity, it was a profound challenge to humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. And Aris Thorne, the once dismissed eccentric, was now its reluctant interpreter, tasked with unveiling its resonant truths to a world ill-prepared to receive them. In the polished, high-tech war room of the Oakhaven Security Bureau, Director Valerius was losing his grip. The luminous drifters, now a permanent fixture in the Vespera corridor's sky, had become a symbol of his agency's failure, a constant, mocking presence that undermined his authority with every passing hour. The public, fueled by Kaylin Vance's incendiary reports and the persistent technological disruptions, was growing increasingly restive. Protests, once localized, were now spreading across the entire corridor, demanding answers, demanding action, demanding his resignation. His intelligence officers presented him with a new, disturbing development. A surge of encrypted data traffic originating from within Vespera Central, destined for a known independent journalists' network. The patterns were subtle, expertly masked, but the algorithms, refined by years of counterintelligence, had finally flagged them. "Thorne," Valerius snarled, his voice a low growl. "Elias Thorne. I knew he was a liability." The thought of a veteran air traffic controller, a man entrusted with the very safety of their skies, actively undermining the OSB, ignited a cold fury within him. And then there was the other Thorne, Aris, the physicist whose theories had always bordered on sedition. Valerius knew with a chilling certainty that the two brothers were somehow connected to the leaks, to the growing narrative that challenged his carefully constructed reality. He issued new directives, his orders sharp and decisive. Increase surveillance on Elias Thorne, every communication, every movement, and find Aris Thorne. Bring him in for questioning. I want to know what he's been telling his brother and what he knows about these Athel fields. Valerius understood that the drifters were not just a physical threat. They were an informational one, a catalyst that was exposing the fault lines within his society. He was determined to crush the dissent, to reassert control, even if it meant sacrificing a few individuals in the process. The unseen web of the drifters' influence was expanding, but Valerius was ready to meet it with a web of his own, a network of surveillance and control designed to ensnare anyone who dared to challenge the Republic's authority. Kaylin Vance, hunched over her compad in a bustling anonymous cafe, felt a surge of exhilaration as Aris Thorne's initial findings began to trickle in. Elias, with increasing stealth and ingenuity, was managing to relay snippets of his brother's analysis. The ethel field, the resonant frequencies, the subtle manipulation of space-time. It was dense, complex scientific theory, but Kaylin, with her innate ability to distill complex information into digestible narratives, knew its power. This wasn't just speculation, This was a scientific explanation, however unconventional, for the impossible phenomenon above them. She began to weave Aris's theories into her reports, carefully framing them as emerging scientific perspectives from independent researchers. She highlighted the correlation between the Ethel field's projected nodes and the areas of reported technological disruption, providing tangible, verifiable evidence for the public's experiences. Her articles, now infused with a new layer of scientific credibility, resonated even more deeply with the populace. The vague fear began to coalesce into a more focused understanding, a dawning realization that the drifters were not just a random occurrence, but a deliberate intelligent force interacting with their world. The public's reaction was immediate and profound. The official narrative, already strained, began to crack under the weight of this new information. Citizen scientists, amateur radio enthusiasts, and even disillusioned engineers began to conduct their own experiments, attempting to detect the resonant frequencies Aris described. Their findings, often crude but surprisingly consistent, flooded Kalen's secure channels, providing further corroboration. The unseen web of the Ethel field was slowly being unveiled, not by the official institutions, but by a grassroots movement of curious and concerned citizens. Kalen knew that the tide was turning. The truth, once confined to the shadows, was now beginning to echo across the Vespera corridor, amplified by the very people the OSB sought to control. Back in Vespera Central, the air had grown thick with suspicion. Elias Thorne felt the invisible net of Director Valerius's surveillance tightening around him. His compad, once a tool of seamless communication, now felt like a leash. Every message, every data transfer, every whispered conversation potentially scrutinized. His colleagues, once a source of camaraderie, now averted their gazes, their silence a louder accusation than any spoken word. He was an anomaly in a system that abhorred deviation, a rogue element in a meticulously controlled environment. The hum, that pervasive low-frequency vibration, had become a constant companion, a physical manifestation of the pressure building within him. His clandestine data transfers to Aris became increasingly perilous. He employed complex encryption, routed through obscure legacy servers, and timed his actions with the precision of a master thief. Each successful transmission was a small, defiant victory, a testament to his unwavering commitment to the truth. But the cost was immense. Sleep became a luxury, paranoia a constant companion. He found himself questioning every interaction, every glance, every casual remark. The weight of his deception, the burden of operating outside the very rules he had dedicated his life to upholding, was immense. Yet the images of the luminous drifters, still hanging silent and enigmatic above the spires, and the chilling implications of Aris's findings, fueled his resolve. He was no longer just an air traffic controller. He was a conduit, a vital link in a chain of truth that threatened to expose the deepest secrets of the Vespera corridor. The OSB's increased scrutiny was not just psychological. He found his access to critical data streams intermittently blocked, his diagnostic tools mysteriously malfunctioning. It was a subtle, insidious campaign designed to isolate him, to cut off his lifelines. Elias knew he was running out of time. The longer he remained within Vespera Central, the greater the risk to himself, to Aris, and to Kalen. The echoes of Ethelgard were demanding a choice, a definitive stand, and Elias Thorne, the man of order, was being forced to embrace the chaos of rebellion. Director Valerius, his face a mask of cold resolve, stared at the holographic projection of Elias Thorne's activity logs. The patterns were undeniable, the encrypted communications a glaring breach of protocol. The connection to Kalen Vance's network was equally clear, a direct line from the heart of Vespera Central to the independent media that was systematically dismantling his authority. And then there was Aris Thorne, the renegade physicist, whose theories were now being amplified by Vance, giving scientific credence to the impossible. Valerius saw not a scientific anomaly, but a coordinated attack, a deliberate attempt to destabilize the Republic of Oakhaven. He activated a secure channel, his voice low and dangerous. Initiate phase gamma, immediate apprehension of Elias Thorne from Vespera Central, deploy a retrieval team for Aris Thorne, use whatever force necessary to secure his research, and Kaylin Vance, I want her silenced, permanently. His orders were met with crisp, professional acknowledgements. There was no hesitation, no questioning. The OSB, a finely tuned instrument of state control, was about to unleash its full force. Valerius understood that the luminous drifters were an existential threat, but the internal dissent, the unraveling of public trust, was an immediate and far more dangerous enemy. He watched the drifters, still silent and enigmatic, hovering above the spires. They were the catalyst, the spark that had ignited this inferno, but the true battle, he realized, was not against the unknown entities in the sky, but against the forces of chaos and rebellion within his own society. He believed he was protecting the Republic, preserving order in the face of an unprecedented challenge. But in his desperate attempt to control the narrative, to suppress the truth, Director Valerius was unwittingly accelerating the very unraveling he sought to prevent. The echoes of Ethelgard were about to become a deafening roar, and the Vespera corridor was on the brink of a conflict far more profound than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 9. The Hunt. Begins the sterile, humming efficiency of Vespera Central shattered with the arrival of the OSB. Director Valerius's order, Initiate Phase Gamma, was executed with brutal precision. A squad of heavily armed operatives, their faces obscured by tactical helmets, stormed the control room. The familiar rhythm of air traffic management dissolved into a cacophony of shouts and the metallic clatter of weapons. Elias Thorne, caught mid-transmission of a crucial data packet to Aris, looked up, his face a mask of grim resignation. He had known this moment was coming, had felt the tightening noose of surveillance for days, but the sudden, violent reality of it still hit with the force of a physical blow. He made no resistance as the operatives moved in, their movements swift and practiced. His compad was ripped from his hand, its encrypted display flickering once before going dark. The hum, that pervasive low-frequency vibration that had become a part of him, seemed to intensify, a silent scream of protest against the violation. As he was roughly escorted from the control room, his eyes swept across the faces of his colleagues. A mixture of fear, shock, and a few fleeting glances of understanding. He wondered if they too felt the unseen web tightening, if they too sensed the profound shift in the Vespera corridor's carefully constructed reality. The luminous drifters, still a silent, enigmatic presence above the spires, seemed to watch his capture, their ethereal glow a cold, indifferent witness to the Republic's descent into authoritarianism. Elias was led through the labyrinthine corridors of Vespera Central. The familiar architecture now imbued with a chilling sense of confinement. He was no longer a guardian of the skies, but a prisoner, a symbol of dissent in a system that demanded absolute conformity. The echoes of Ethelgard, once a scientific curiosity, had now become a political weapon, and Elias Thorne, the reluctant revolutionary, was its first casualty. His capture was not just the silencing of a voice, it was a stark declaration from Director Valerius. The truth, if it challenged the established order, would be crushed without mercy. The hunt had begun, and Elias knew with a sinking heart that he was only the first miles away, in the secluded depths of his subterranean lab, Aris Thorne felt a sudden, inexplicable jolt. It wasn't a physical tremor, but a psychic ripple, a faint echo of distress that resonated with the subtle hum of the ethel field he was meticulously mapping. His holographic displays, usually a kaleidoscope of shimmering energy patterns, flickered erratically, momentarily distorting the intricate visualizations of the drifter's resonant frequencies. He knew, with a scientist's intuition, that something significant had just occurred, something that threatened the delicate balance of his clandestine research. He had just finished a breakthrough, isolating a specific harmonic within the ethel field that suggested a complex, almost linguistic structure. The implications were staggering. The drifters weren't just emitting energy, they were communicating, perhaps even thinking. He was about to transmit his latest findings to Elias when the lab's security alarms blared, a harsh, insistent shriek that cut through the quiet hum of his equipment. OSB, a synthesized voice boomed through the intercom. Stand down and surrender your research. Aris moved with a frantic, desperate energy. He knew the OSB would not hesitate to seize his work, to bury his theories under layers of official secrecy. His fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating a cascade of data purges, encrypting his most sensitive files, and uploading fragmented copies to a network of secure, anonymous servers he had established years ago. He wasn't just protecting his research, he was protecting the truth, ensuring that even if he was silenced, the echoes of Ethelgard would continue to resonate. As the heavy blast door to his lab began to buckle under the force of the OSB's breaching charges, Aris grabbed a small, encrypted data slate containing his most critical findings, a desperate hope flickering in his eyes. He would not let his life's work, the key to understanding the luminous drifters, fall into the hands of those who sought to suppress it. The hunt had indeed begun, and Aris Thorne, the eccentric physicist, was now a hunted man, clutching the secrets of the universe in his trembling hands. Kaylin Vance, immersed in the chaotic symphony of her compad, felt the digital world around her begin to fray. The encrypted channels she used to disseminate her reports flickered, then died. Her secure relays, once robust, were systematically being dismantled. The flood of citizen reports, her lifeline to the truth, slowed to a trickle, then ceased altogether. It was a digital siege, a calculated move by the OSB to cut off her information supply, to isolate her, to silence her. She knew Director Valerius would not tolerate dissent, but the speed and ruthlessness of his response still sent a chill down her spine. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. She had received an anonymous encrypted warning just minutes before the digital blackout. They're coming for you. Phase Gamma initiated. The message was stark, unambiguous. She knew what Phase Gamma meant. It was the OSB's highest level of internal security operation, reserved for threats to national stability. And Kaylin Vance, with her relentless pursuit of truth, had clearly been deemed one such threat. She moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing her most critical data slates, her emergency comm unit, and a worn backpack. Years of operating on the fringes, of exposing uncomfortable truths, had taught her to be prepared for this moment. As she slipped out of her apartment building, blending into the early morning crowds of Silver Reach, she saw them. OSB patrols, their black uniforms stark against the pre-dawn gloom, systematically sweeping the streets, their compads scanning for unauthorized signals. They weren't just looking for her. They were looking for anyone who dared to question the official narrative. Kaylin felt a surge of defiant anger. They could cut off her channels, they could hunt her down, but they could not erase the truth. The echoes of Ethelgard, amplified by her reports, had already taken root in the public consciousness. She was a hunted woman, but she was not alone. The hunt had indeed begun, and Kaylin Vance, the relentless journalist, was now a fugitive, carrying the torch of truth into the shadows. Director Valerius watched the live feeds from his command center, a grim satisfaction settling over him. Elias Thorne was secured, R.S. Thorne's lab was breached, and Kaylin Vance was on the run, her digital footprint rapidly diminishing. Phase Gamma was proceeding as planned. The public, initially agitated, was now being bombarded with a new, carefully crafted narrative. The luminous drifters were a misidentified atmospheric phenomenon. The technological glitches were localized infrastructure failures, and the dissenting voices were unpatriotic elements spreading misinformation. The official news channels, now under direct OSB control, broadcast a relentless stream of reassuring but ultimately false reports, designed to quell panic and reassert authority. But beneath the surface, the Vespera corridor was a city in turmoil. The crackdown had not gone unnoticed. The arrests of prominent independent journalists, the sudden disappearance of outspoken scientists, and the heavy-handed tactics of the OSB had sent a ripple of fear through the populace. Trust in the Republic's institutions, already fragile, was eroding at an alarming rate. In Iron Basin, where the working class had been most vocal in their protests, the streets were now patrolled by armoured OSB units, their presence a stark reminder of the consequences of dissent. The technological disruptions, though officially denied, continued to plague the city, a constant, unsettling reminder that something was fundamentally wrong. Valerius believed he was restoring order, but in reality he was sowing the seeds of deeper rebellion. The luminous drifters, still hovering silently above the spires, were no longer just a scientific enigma. They were a symbol of defiance, a silent protest against the authoritarian grip of the OSB. The echoes of Ethelgard were not just a scientific phenomenon, they were a call to freedom, a resonant frequency that was slowly awakening the dormant spirit of resistance within the Vespera corridor. The hunt had begun, but Valerius, in his desperate attempt to control the narrative, was inadvertently creating a new generation of dissidents, individuals who would not be silenced by force or deception. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the Vespera corridor, the luminous drifters above the spires seemed to glow with a renewed, almost defiant intensity. Their silent presence, once a source of scientific curiosity, had now become a beacon of hope for some, a symbol of oppression for others. Elias Thorne was being processed through a secure OSB detention facility, his mind already racing, trying to find a way to communicate, to continue the fight from within. R.S. Thorne, having narrowly escaped his lab, was now a ghost in the system, a brilliant mind forced into the shadows, clutching the secrets of the ethel field. And Kaylin Vance, the relentless journalist, was a phantom in the city, moving through its underbelly, her compad a silent weapon ready to strike back. Director Valerius, for all his decisive action, felt a cold, unsettling unease. The crackdown had been swift, efficient, but the silence that followed was not the peace he had anticipated. It was a tense, brittle quiet, pregnant with unspoken defiance. The technological disruptions, though officially attributed to infrastructure failures, continued to plague the city, a constant, irritating reminder of the drifters' pervasive influence. He had silenced the voices, but he had not silenced the hum, the unseen frequencies that were subtly reshaping their reality. He had won the battle for control, but the war for truth, he realized, was far from over. Across the Vespera corridor, in countless homes and hidden corners, the seeds of resistance had been sown. The official narrative, once absolute, was now met with skepticism, with a quiet, simmering anger. The luminous drifters, those impossible objects in the sky, had not just brought a scientific enigma. They had brought a profound awakening, a realization that the world they thought they knew was far more complex, far more mysterious, and far less controlled than they had ever imagined. The echoes of Ethelgard were no longer just a scientific phenomenon. They were a rallying cry, a silent promise that the truth, however inconvenient, would eventually find its way out. The hunt had begun, but so too had the revolution, and the future of the Vespera corridor hung precariously in the balance, under the silent, watchful gaze of the luminous drifters. Chapter 10. The shifting sands, the sterile, unforgiving white of the OSB detention cell was a stark contrast to the vibrant, data-rich environment Elias Thorne had inhabited for decades. The hum, that pervasive low-frequency vibration, was still there, a phantom limb of his former reality, but here it was muffled, distorted, almost suffocating. He sat on a cold, metallic bench, his hands cuffed, his mind racing. They had stripped him of his compad, his access, his identity as an air traffic controller. But they could not strip him of his mind, nor the chilling knowledge he now possessed. The luminous drifters, still a silent, enigmatic presence above the spires, were no longer just a scientific anomaly. They were the catalyst for a profound societal upheaval, and Elias, despite his confinement, knew he was still a player in this unfolding drama. His interrogators, a rotating cast of grim-faced OSB agents, were relentless. They spoke of treason, of undermining national security, of collaborating with known dissidents. Elias met their accusations with a stoic silence, offering only the bare minimum of information, carefully constructing a narrative that protected Aris and Kalen while revealing nothing of substance. He understood their tactics. They sought to break him, to isolate him, to force him to recant. But Elias, a man forged in the crucible of precision and control, found a new kind of strength in his defiance. He used his time in confinement to observe, to analyze, to understand the inner workings of his captors, searching for weaknesses, for opportunities. The hum, though muffled, seemed to pulse with a new rhythm, a subtle shift in its frequency that Elias, with his heightened sensitivity, could detect. It was as if the ethel field, even within the confines of the OSB's most secure facility, was subtly asserting its presence, a silent reminder that their control was an illusion. He knew that his capture was not the end, but merely a new phase in the unfolding conflict. The echoes of Ethelgard were not confined to the skies, they were permeating the very foundations of the Republic, and Elias Thorne, the imprisoned air traffic controller, was now an unwilling witness to its slow, inexorable transformation. The sands were shifting, and the Vespera corridor, once so stable, was beginning to crumble. Aris Thorne, now a ghost in the system, moved through the Vespera corridor's underbelly with a practiced stealth he hadn't known he possessed. His lab, once a sanctuary of scientific exploration, was now a sealed OSB crime scene, his life's work either confiscated or destroyed. Yet, the small, encrypted data slate he clutched contained the essence of his research, the key to understanding the ethel field. He had found refuge in a forgotten sublevel of the Oak Haven National University, a network of abandoned tunnels and disused research stations, a place where the hum of the drifters was a faint, almost comforting presence, a reminder of the truth he carried. He had managed to salvage a few pieces of portable equipment, jury-rigging them into a makeshift lab. His holographic displays, powered by scavenged energy cells, flickered with the familiar patterns of the ethel field, now refined by the latest data Elias had managed to transmit before his capture. Harris's understanding of the drifter's resonant frequencies deepened with each passing hour. He discovered that the field was not just a passive influence, it was dynamic, responsive, almost alive. It reacted to the city's energy grid, to the collective consciousness of its inhabitants, subtly shifting its harmonics in response to external stimuli. The implications were staggering. The drifters were not just observing, they were interacting, learning, adapting. His isolation was profound, but it also granted him an unparalleled focus. Free from the constraints of academic dogma and the prying eyes of the OSB, Harris pushed the boundaries of his theories. He began to hypothesize about the purpose of the ethel field, its potential for communication, for transformation. The hum, once a scientific curiosity, now felt like a silent dialogue, a language he was slowly beginning to decipher. He knew that Elias and Kalin were out there, fighting their own battles, and his research was their only hope. The shifting sands of the Vespera corridor were not just political, they were scientific, and Aris Thorne, the fugitive physicist, was now racing against time to unlock the secrets of a new reality. Kalin Vance, now a phantom in the sprawling metropolis, moved through the Vespera corridor with a heightened sense of awareness. Every shadow held a potential threat, every casual glance a possible OSB operative. Her once bustling apartment was a distant memory replaced by a series of safe houses. Forgotten storage units, abandoned commercial spaces, and the occasional sympathetic contact's spare room. The digital world, her former battlefield, was now a minefield. Her secure channels were compromised, her public platforms shut down, and her name flagged across every surveillance network. She was effectively silenced, her voice, once a rallying cry, now reduced to a whisper in the digital yet comma. Kalin was not broken. The OSB's crackdown had only hardened her resolve. She adapted, learning to navigate the dark web with new anonymity protocols, communicating through dead drops and encrypted one-time use comm units. Her network, though fragmented, remained loyal, providing her with snippets of information, whispers of dissent, and the occasional crucial piece of data. She focused on documenting the human cost of the OSB's authoritarian response, the arbitrary arrests, the disappearances, the chilling effect on free speech. She knew that even if she couldn't publish widely, every piece of evidence she collected was a weapon, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. The luminous drifters, still a silent, enigmatic presence above the spires, were a constant reminder of the truth she fought for. Their hum, that subtle, pervasive vibration, seemed to follow her, a phantom echo in the city's cacophony. She found herself noticing the technological glitches with a new, almost intuitive understanding. A flickering street lamp, a stuttering public transport display, a sudden drop in comm signal. These weren't just malfunctions, they were the drifters' silent language, a constant, unsettling reminder that their reality was far more complex than the OSB dared to admit. The shifting sands of the Vespera corridor were not just political, they were personal, and Kalin Vance, the hunted journalist, was now fighting not just for the truth, but for her very survival in a world that sought to erase her. Director Valerius, ensconced in the sterile opulence of his private office, reviewed the latest intelligence reports. Elias Thorne was securely detained. Aris Thorne was a fugitive, his lab ransacked, and Kalin Vance was a ghost, her public platforms silenced. The initial wave of public unrest, though not entirely quelled, had been largely contained. The official narrative, carefully crafted and relentlessly broadcast, was slowly but surely taking hold. The luminous drifters were a natural phenomenon, the technological glitches were isolated incidents, and the dissenting voices were unpatriotic elements spreading fear. He had won. He had reasserted control, stabilized the Republic, and crushed the nascent rebellion. Yet, a persistent, almost imperceptible unease gnawed at him. The drifters, still a silent, enigmatic presence above the spires, continued to defy all conventional explanation. His scientific advisers, though publicly towing the official line, privately expressed their bewilderment. The technological disruptions, while less frequent, still occurred, a constant, irritating reminder that their control was not absolute. And the hum, that low-frequency vibration that seemed to permeate the very air of the Vespera corridor, had begun to affect him too. A persistent headache, a subtle disorientation, a feeling that the world was subtly out of sync. He dismissed it as stress, the burden of leadership in unprecedented times. He looked out his panoramic window towards the distant, shimmering forms. He had restored order, but at what cost? The trust between the government and its people had been irrevocably fractured. The scientific community had been silenced, its pursuit of truth sacrificed for political expediency, and the drifters, those impossible objects, remained a silent, mocking testament to his ultimate failure to truly understand, to truly control. Valerius had won the battle, but the war, he realized, was far from over. The shifting sands of the Vespera corridor were not just political, they were existential, and Director Valerius, the architect of order, was beginning to feel the ground tremble beneath his feet. Beneath the veneer of restored order, the Vespera corridor was a landscape of shifting allegiances and simmering discontent. Director Valerius might have believed he had silenced the dissent, but in reality he had merely driven it underground. The public, though outwardly compliant, harbored a deep-seated skepticism. Their trust in official pronouncements irrevocably eroded. The technological disruptions, though less frequently reported by the now-controlled media, continued to plague the city, a constant, unsettling reminder that the luminous drifters were still an active, pervasive force. The hum, that low-frequency vibration, had become a subtle, almost subconscious presence in the lives of many, a shared secret that bound them in an unspoken understanding. In the shadows, a new network was beginning to form. Kaylin Vance, operating from a series of hidden, safe houses, became the nexus of this nascent resistance. Her encrypted messages, though fragmented and difficult to access, carried the seeds of truth. Fueled by the raw data, Elias, even from his confinement, found subtle ways to hint at, and by Aris's increasingly profound insights into the ethel field. Disillusioned, OSB agents, sympathetic technicians, and ordinary citizens, all touched by the drifters' influence and repulsed by Valerius's authoritarianism, began to gravitate towards Kaylin's clandestine network, providing her with crucial intelligence and resources. The luminous drifters, still a silent, enigmatic presence above the spires, were no longer just a scientific enigma. They were a symbol. For Valerius, they represented a threat to be controlled, an anomaly to be suppressed. But for Elias, Aris, and Kaylin, and the growing number of those who dared to question, they represented a profound truth, a challenge to their understanding of reality, and a catalyst for change. The echoes of Aethelgard were not just a scientific phenomenon, they were a call to awakening, a resonant frequency that was slowly but surely transforming the Vespera corridor from a meticulously controlled metropolis into a crucible of rebellion. The sands were shifting, and the true battle for the future of Oakhaven was only just beginning, fought not with weapons, but with information, with truth, and with the unwavering belief that some echoes, once heard, can never be silenced. Chapter 11. Whispers in the Cage. The monotony of the OSB detention cell was a weapon in itself, designed to break the spirit as much as the body. Elias Thorne, however, found a strange solace in its predictability. Each day was a mirror of the last. The metallic clang of the door at precisely 6 o'clock for the meagre nutrient paste, the hour of solitary exercise in a small, enclosed yard, the endless parade of interrogators, their questions circling like vultures around the same few facts. Yet, beneath the surface of this enforced routine, Elias was waging his own silent war. His mind, honed by decades of processing complex data, was his most potent weapon, and he used it to analyze, to observe, to find the cracks in the OSB's meticulously constructed cage dot. He had learned the subtle rhythms of the facility, the shift changes of the guards, the blind spots in the surveillance cameras, the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the ventilation system that carried whispers from other cells. He catalogued the psychological profiles of his interrogators, identifying their weaknesses, their biases, their moments of vulnerability. He knew when to offer a carefully worded half-truth, when to feign ignorance, and when to simply remain silent, letting the weight of their own frustration bear down on them. He was a prisoner, yes, but he was also an observer, gathering intelligence, preparing for a moment he knew would eventually come. The hum, that pervasive, low-frequency vibration of the ether field, was still his constant companion, though here, deep within the OSB's reinforced concrete, it was a faint, distant thrum. Yet even in its muffled state, Elias felt its subtle influence. He noticed the occasional flicker in the cell's harsh fluorescent lights, the momentary distortion in the audio feed from the intercom. These were not just malfunctions, they were echoes, subtle reminders that the drifter's influence permeated even this supposedly secure environment. He began to interpret these glitches, these subtle shifts in the hum, as a form of communication, a silent dialogue between the unseen forces above and the technology below. The cage might hold his body, but his mind, attuned to the unseen frequencies, was still free, still connected to the larger unfolding mystery of the Vespera corridor. Dr. Elias Thorne, despite his physical confinement, found subtle ways to resist. During his brief, supervised exercise periods in the yard, he would meticulously observe the patterns of the automated surveillance drones, noting their blind spots, their patrol routes, the precise moments when their optical sensors cycled. He began to communicate in a language of his own, a silent semaphore of subtle gestures and carefully placed objects, hoping that someone, anyone outside his cage might be watching, might be listening. He knew the OSB was monitoring his every word, so his messages had to be non-verbal, coded, almost subliminal. He also began to subtly manipulate the limited technology available to him. The nutrient paste dispenser, a simple, automated unit, occasionally experienced inexplicable malfunctions, dispensing double portions or failing to operate altogether. The cell's environmental controls, designed for optimal prisoner comfort, would sometimes fluctuate wildly, plunging the cell into an uncomfortable chill or a stifling heat. These were not random occurrences, they were Elias's subtle acts of sabotage designed to create minor disruptions, to draw attention, to signal that even within the most secure facility, control was not absolute. He knew these acts were small, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they were his way of fighting back, of asserting his will against the overwhelming force of the OSB. The hum, that constant low-frequency vibration, seemed to guide him, a silent partner in his resistance. He found that by focusing on its subtle shifts, he could almost predict the moments of technological disruption, the brief windows of opportunity when the OSB's surveillance systems flickered. It was a dangerous game, a high-stakes gamble, but Elias knew he had no other choice. He was a prisoner, but he was not powerless. His mind, his observations, his connection into the unseen frequencies, these were his weapons, and he wielded them with a quiet, desperate determination, waiting for the moment when his whispers in the cage would finally be heard dot in the forgotten sublevels of the Oakhaven National University. Aris Thorne, now a true phantom, was pushing the boundaries of his understanding. His makeshift lab, cobbled together from scavenged parts and his own ingenuity, hummed with a low, rhythmic energy, a counterpoint to the pervasive ethyl field. The data slate Elias had managed to transmit, combined with his own ongoing observations, was revealing new layers to the drifter's influence. He had begun to categorize the resonant frequencies, identifying distinct harmonics that correlated with different types of technological disruption. It was like deciphering a complex musical score, each note a subtle manipulation of reality. He theorized that the ethyl field was not merely a static energy bubble, but a dynamic, evolving construct, a kind of living network that responded to its environment. The drifters, he now believed, were not just objects, but nodes within this network, their collective presence creating a vast, interconnected web of altered reality. He had even begun to detect faint, almost subliminal patterns within the field itself, patterns that suggested a form of non-verbal communication, a silent dialogue unfolding above their heads. The implications were staggering. If he could understand this language, if he could tap into this network, he might be able to communicate with the drifters, to understand their purpose. His work was fraught with peril. The OSB patrols, though not yet aware of his hidden sanctuary, were constantly sweeping the university grounds. He worked in bursts, always ready to shut down his equipment and vanish into the labyrinthine tunnels at the first sign of intrusion. But the urgency of his research, the profound implications of his discoveries, outweighed the personal risk. He knew that the truth, the understanding of the ethyl field, was the only way to counter the OSB's lies, to free Elias, and to protect Kalin. The whispers in the cage, the silent hum of the drifters, were guiding him, pushing him deeper into the heart of a mystery that promised to redefine not just physics, but the very nature of consciousness itself. Kalin Vance, a ghost in the machine of the Vespera corridor, navigated the city's underbelly with a practiced ease born of necessity. Her network, though fragmented and under constant assault from the OSB, remained her lifeline. She communicated through a series of dead drops, encrypted burst transmissions, and a rotating roster of anonymous couriers, each contact a calculated risk. Her articles, now stripped of their byline and disseminated through a decentralized web of independent news aggregators, continued to expose the OSB's lies, detailing the arbitrary arrests, the suppression of scientific inquiry, and the chilling erosion of civil liberties. She was no longer just reporting the news, she was actively shaping it, a defiant voice in the digital wilderness. Her focus had shifted from merely documenting the drifters to exposing the systemic corruption that allowed the OSB to control the narrative. She meticulously collected evidence of Valerius's authoritarian tactics, leaked internal memos detailing surveillance protocols, eyewitness accounts of OSB brutality, and the growing list of disappeared dissidents. She understood that the luminous drifters were the catalyst, but the true enemy was the fear and control that the OSB sought to impose. Her mission was not just to reveal the truth about the ethyl field, but to awaken the populace. The dangers of unchecked power. The hum, that subtle, pervasive vibration, was her constant companion, a silent reminder of the profound changes sweeping through the Vespera corridor. She noticed its subtle shifts, its momentary intensifications, and began to correlate them with the OSB's increased activity, almost as if the drifters were reacting to the growing tension in the city. Kaylin knew that her work was dangerous, that each transmission, each contact, brought her closer to capture. But the thought of Elias in his cage and Aris in his hidden lab fueled her resolve. She was a hunted woman, but she was not alone, and the whispers in the cage, the silent hum of the drifters, were slowly but surely becoming a rallying cry for a city on the brink of awakening. Director Valerius, despite his outward confidence, felt the subtle tremors of his control slipping. The public, though outwardly subdued, harbored a deep-seated resentment, a quiet defiance that was far more insidious than open rebellion. His intelligence reports, though sanitized, hinted at a persistent undercurrent of dissent, a network of whispers that defied his most sophisticated surveillance. The technological disruptions, officially dismissed as minor glitches, continued to plague the Vespera corridor, a constant, irritating reminder that the luminous drifters, those impossible objects, were still asserting their unseen influence. He had silenced the voices, but he had not silenced the hum, that pervasive, low-frequency vibration that seemed to be subtly reshaping the very fabric of his city. He ordered an intensification of all surveillance efforts, a dragnet designed to ensnare every dissenting voice, every suspected collaborator. The OSB patrols in Iron Basin became more aggressive, the digital censorship more pervasive. He knew he was pushing the Republic to its breaking point, but he saw no other choice. The alternative, he believed, was chaos, the complete unraveling of the order he had sworn to protect. He looked at the holographic projection of the drifters, still hovering silently above the spires, their ethereal glow a cold, indifferent challenge. He had to understand them, to control them, before they consumed everything. Meanwhile, in their separate struggles, Elias, Aris, and Kaylin felt the tightening noose. Elias, in his cage, continued his silent acts of defiance, his mind a fortress of resistance. Aris, in his hidden lab, pushed his research to its limits, convinced that the key to understanding the drifters lay in deciphering their resonant language. And Kaylin, the phantom journalist, continued to weave her unseen web of truth, connecting the disparate threads of resistance into a nascent, powerful force. The echoes of Ethelgard were no longer just whispers. They were a growing chorus, a resonant frequency that was slowly but surely awakening the Vespera corridor. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the confrontation, long brewing beneath the surface, was now inevitable. The shifting sands were about to give way, and the true battle for the soul of Oakhaven was about to begin. Chapter 12. The cracks in the facade. Elias Thorne, confined within the stark geometry of his OSB cell, found his senses sharpening, adapting to the subtle nuances of his new reality. The monotony, once a tool of his captors, had become a canvas for his observations. He meticulously mapped the routines of the guards, the faint echoes of conversations from distant corridors, the precise timing of the automated systems that governed his existence. He was no longer just an air traffic controller. He was an intelligence analyst, dissecting the inner workings of the OSB's detention facility with the same precision he once applied to flight paths. The hum, that omnipresent, low-frequency vibration of the ethel field, was his constant companion, a subtle current flowing beneath the reinforced concrete, guiding his heightened awareness. He noticed the subtle shifts in the hum, correlating them with the increased activity outside his cell, the hurried footsteps, the hushed, urgent tones of the guards. It was as if the drifters themselves were reacting to the escalating tension in the Vespera corridor, their unseen influence mirroring the growing unrest. Elias used these subtle cues to anticipate interrogations, to prepare his responses, to maintain his carefully constructed facade of weary compliance. He knew that his silence, his refusal to betray Aris or Kalen, was a form of resistance, a quiet defiance that chipped away at the OSB's authority. However incrementally his subtle acts of sabotage continued, small but persistent irritants in the OSB's meticulously controlled environment. A nutrient paste dispenser that consistently malfunctioned, causing minor logistical headaches. A cell light that flickered with an almost rhythmic irregularity, disrupting the guards' surveillance patterns. These were not random glitches, they were Elias's whispers in the cage, coded messages of defiance, designed to remind his captors that even in confinement, the human spirit, especially one attuned to the unseen frequencies, could not be entirely suppressed. The cracks in the OSB's facade were subtle, almost imperceptible, but Elias, with his sharpened senses, could feel them widening, a silent testament to the profound and unsettling transformation sweeping through the Vespera corridor. In the hidden depths of the Oakhaven National University, Aris Thorne was pushing the boundaries of his makeshift lab. The data Elias had provided, combined with his own relentless observations, had allowed him to refine his understanding of the ethel field to an unprecedented degree. He had moved beyond merely detecting the resonant frequencies. He was now attempting to manipulate them. His goal, to create a device, a resonant frequency modulator, that could not only detect the drifters with absolute clarity, but potentially even interact with their ethel field, perhaps even communicate with them. His current project, a complex array of salvaged components and custom-built emitters, pulsed with a faint, rhythmic glow. He had theorized that the drifters' ethel field operated on a principle of sympathetic resonance, a kind of quantum entanglement that allowed them to subtly influence their environment. If he could create a counter-frequency, a harmonic that mirrored their own, he might be able to establish a bridge, a two-way channel of interaction. The work was painstaking, fraught with trial and error, each failed attempt, a reminder of the immense scientific chasm separating human technology from the drifters' inherent capabilities. Yet, Aris was driven by an almost manic energy. He knew that Elias was imprisoned and Kalen was a fugitive. Their only hope lay in understanding the drifters, in finding a way to unveil their secrets before the OSB's iron fist crushed all dissent. The hum, that pervasive low-frequency vibration, was no longer just a scientific curiosity. It was a silent challenge, a call to intellectual arms. He felt a profound connection to the drifters, a sense of shared purpose that transcended the boundaries of species and understanding. He was convinced that the key to their freedom and perhaps the future of the Vespera corridor lay in the unveiling of this unseen web, in the deciphering of its resonant language. His device, crude as it was his first step towards that profound unveiling, a whisper back into the silent, resonant heart of the ethel field. Kalen Vance, a phantom in the Vespera corridor, found her resolve hardening with each passing day. The OSB's crackdown had not silenced her. It had merely refined her methods. Operating from a network of safe houses, each chosen for its anonymity and access to the city's forgotten digital arteries, she continued to wage her war of information. Her articles, now disseminated through a decentralized web of independent news aggregators and encrypted peer-to-peer networks, bypassed the OSB's firewalls, reaching a populace hungry for truth. She meticulously documented the human cost of Valerius's authoritarianism, the arbitrary arrests, the forced disappearances, the chilling effect on free speech. Her words, stripped of their byline, became a collective voice of defiance, echoing through the digital shadows. Her network, though constantly under threat, was growing. Disillusioned, OSB agents, sympathetic technicians, and ordinary citizens, all touched by the drifter's influence and repulsed by Valerius's heavy-handed tactics, gravitated towards Kaelin's clandestine operation. They provided her with invaluable intelligence, leaked internal memos, surveillance reports, and whispers of dissent from within the very heart of the OSB. She was no longer just a journalist. She was a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of resistance, each note a defiant act against the encroaching darkness. The hum, that subtle, pervasive vibration, was her constant companion, a silent reminder of the profound changes sweeping through the Vespera corridor. She noticed its subtle shifts, its momentary intensifications, and began to correlate them with the OSB's increased activity, almost as if the drifters were reacting to the growing tension in the city. Kaelin knew that her work was dangerous, that each transmission, each contact, brought her closer to capture. But the thought of Elias in his cage and Aris in his hidden lab fueled her resolve. She was a hunted woman, but she was not alone, and the whispers in the cage, the silent hum of the drifters, were slowly but surely becoming a rallying cry for a city on the brink of awakening. The cracks in the facade of OSB control were becoming more apparent, not just in the digital realm, but in the growing unrest on the streets, a testament to the power of truth, even when whispered from the shadows. Director Valerius, despite the apparent success of Phase Gamma, felt a gnawing frustration. The Vespera corridor, though outwardly subdued, was a powder keg of simmering discontent. His intelligence reports, meticulously compiled by his surveillance teams, painted a picture of a populace that, while silenced, was far from convinced. The independent news networks, though officially shut down, continued to circulate Kaelin Vance's reports through encrypted channels, their reach proving surprisingly resilient, and the technological disruptions officially dismissed as isolated incidents persisted, a constant irritating reminder that the luminous drifters, those impossible objects, remained an active, pervasive force. He paced his office, the polished floor reflecting the holographic projections of the drifters, still hovering silently above the spires. His scientific advisors, now under strict orders to produce results, offered only inconclusive theories, their data still unable to penetrate the ethel field. The hum, that low-frequency vibration that had become a constant presence in the city, had begun to affect him too. A persistent ringing in his ears, a subtle disorientation that he attributed to stress, but which, in his private moments, he feared was something more insidious. He had crushed the rebellion, but he had not eliminated the cause, nor had he truly restored order. Valerius understood that his victory was superficial, a fragile veneer over a deeply fractured society. The public's trust, once a given, was now shattered. The scientific community, once a source of pride, was now a hotbed of suppressed dissent. And the drifters, those silent, enigmatic entities, remained a profound and unsettling challenge to his authority, a constant, mocking testament to his ultimate failure to control the uncontrollable. He had won the battle, but the war, he realized, was far from over. The cracks in the facade of his control were widening, not just in the digital realm, but in the very fabric of the Vespera corridor, a silent, inexorable unraveling that threatened to consume everything he and everything he stood for. As the days turned into weeks, the luminous drifters remained, a silent, unwavering presence that had irrevocably altered the landscape of the Vespera corridor. Their ethereal glow, once a source of terror, had begun to integrate into the city's nocturnal rhythm, a new, unsettling star in their urban sky. Yet beneath this veneer of acceptance, the subtle signs of their increasing influence were becoming undeniable. The hum, that pervasive, low-frequency vibration, was no longer just a background noise. It was a subtle current, a constant pressure that seemed to permeate every aspect of life, from the flickering of the city's vast digital billboards to the almost imperceptible tremor in the ground beneath their feet. In his cell, Elias Thorne felt the hum intensify, a silent dialogue between his heightened senses and the unseen forces above. He noticed the guards, usually stoic and impassive, exhibiting subtle signs of agitation. A nervous twitch, a momentary lapse in focus, a distant, unfocused gaze. It was as if the ethel field was subtly eroding their resolve, chipping away at their meticulously maintained control. Aris Thorne, in his hidden lab, observed similar phenomena, his instruments registering a gradual but consistent increase in the field's intensity, its resonant frequencies slowly permeating deeper into the earth, into the very infrastructure of the city. He was convinced that the drifters were not just observing, they were preparing, their silent presence a prelude to something far more profound. Kaelin Vance, navigating the city's shadows, witnessed the growing unrest firsthand. The public, though outwardly compliant, harbored a deep-seated resentment, a quiet defiance that manifested in subtle acts of rebellion, whispered conversations, coded messages exchanged through secure channels, and a growing network of individuals who refused to accept the official narrative. The drifters, those impossible objects, had become a symbol, a rallying point, for a populace that was slowly but surely awakening to the truth. The cracks in the facade of OSB control were widening, not just in the digital realm, but in the hearts and minds of the people. The echoes of Aethelgard were no longer just whispers. They were a growing chorus, a resonant frequency that was slowly, but surely, transforming the Vespera corridor. The true battle for the soul of Oakhaven was not just beginning, it was already underway, fought in the shadows, in the silence, and in the unseen frequencies that now permeated their world. A brief interlude, the unbroken echo. In the heart of the Vespera corridor, the OSB's victory felt hollow. Director Valerius, despite his iron grip, could not silence the hum, nor could he erase the luminous drifters from the sky. They remained a silent, shimmering testament to a truth he refused to acknowledge. His triumph was a fragile illusion built on fear and deception, and beneath its surface, the seeds of a new resistance were already taking root. Elias Thorne, in his cell, found a new rhythm in the muffled hum, a silent promise of connection. He began to tap a subtle code on the metallic bench, a series of precise, almost imperceptible vibrations, hoping that somewhere, somehow, the unseen web would carry his message. Aris Thorne, deep within his hidden lab, watched his resonant frequency modulator pulse with a new, complex pattern, a response from the drifters themselves, a silent dialogue beginning to unfold, and Kaelin Vance, a phantom in the city's shadows, received a fragmented, encrypted message. A single, defiant word, resonate. The echoes of Aethelgard were not broken, they were merely changing their tune, preparing for a symphony of truth that would eventually shatter the silence.